Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Luffy Ate Icy-Mag Devil Fruit and Smashed Grand Line. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Back in the village, the party was still going strong. The villagers were excited to finally be free from the influence of Arlong, and the Straw Hats were just happy to be a part of it. Earlier that day the Marines had visited and arrested most of the fishmen. They had come because some survivors of Gosa had contacted them. However, when they got there, they found that they had apparently already liberated the island. The captain was surprised to see that the villagers had managed to take down a pirate crew. But with no one else coming forth and taking credit, he chose to accept it. He knew that an arrest of this size was undoubtedly going to go a long way. Arresting most of a pirate crew with a confirmation of the death of a 20 million berry pirate. If he just fudged the facts a little bit, him and his men could be the heroes of this whole situation with a promotion on the horizon. Nezumi laughed. His previous association with Arlong had been very profitable for him, so it was only fair that Arlong gives him something with his death. Now he was on his way to the nearest marine base where he would get in contact with his superiors, submit his report, and they would tell him what to do with the prisoners. Unfortunately for Nezumi was that a report had already been made. A high-clearance marine spy had already witnessed the events on the island and had reported precisely what he had seen when it was all done. Nezumi's conflicting report would cause some higher-ups to scrutinize Nezumi's actions that brought him to lie on an official statement to his superiors. The under-the-table dealings with pirates would become uncovered, and Nezumi would, in the end, find himself a new position at Impel Down. Unfortunately for him, it was titleless, unpaid, and would require him to bunk with other prisoners. People of the village were excited to finally get their lives back from Arlong. No more cowering under his rule. No more monthly tributes, and they would no longer have to watch as their children and family went hungry as Arlong hoarded their island's wealth. Zoro and the bounty hunter duo were currently drinking with a crowd of villagers. Yasaku and Johnny were now regaling the villagers in the tale of how Zoro had gone toe-to-toe with Hawkeye, the world's greatest swordsman, and lived. Yuzop had managed to drag Kaya into singing about how great he and his crew were. It was, and Kaya was enjoying it immensely. Mijiko had just strolled into town to find Sanji attempting to woo some of the local girls, which was actually mildly successful considering some had actually witnessed his fight with Kirubai. However, strolling up to him confidently, she pulled him away from the fawning girls and pulled him towards the bar. Sanji was first annoyed to see he was being kept from his adoring female fans, but when he noticed who was pulling him away, from his anger quickly faded, and he calmly followed her to wherever she may take him. At one point in the party, Dr. Nako had gotten the attention of Kaya and wanted to give her some of his own notes and books on medicine that Kaya would hopefully find useful. He had looked over Zoro's wounds after the fight and had seen that the injuries had been treated properly. Although the stitching could use the hand of a seasoned doctor, it was still done quite well. After the battle, she had helped him a lot in dressing the wounds of those who had gotten hurt in action. While none had been life-threatening, it was helpful to have another set of hands to divide the work. He had been impressed with the girl's skills, especially when he found out that she had lacked an actual tutor in the profession. He knew one day she would become a great doctor, especially if she found someone to tutor her along the way, which is why he was happy to give her supplies and texts to help her in her journey to become a doctor. Luffy and Nami decided to join the party back at the village. Both shared a comfortable silence as they walked towards the town. Nami, still in possession of Luffy's hat, handed it over to Luffy, who put it back on his head. Although Luffy began wondering how the village would feel about his victory. Would they be scared of him? He could only wonder as they made their way back. Entering the village, they were greeted with cheers as Cocoyasi village welcomed its hero. He met up with his crew as they told him how they had won their own battles. Yuzop was very proud of his victory, and Kaya was as well. Luffy had learned that a lot of the fishmen had escaped the island after the battle, namely Chu and Hatchin, who had been on the road between the village and the stronghold when the Navy had shown. Luffy was glad to hear that Hatchin had gotten away. It had been hard to see a person that was once his nakama his enemy again. He had been surprised to hear about Chu, but in all honesty, he had no idea if he had even been captured the last time. So the party continued on. Now that the hero of the island and Nami were here, the party only got more intense as the night went on. Nami had managed to drag Luffy into a drinking contest. He had never really had a taste for alcohol before, but he relented when it came to Nami's insistence. He had been surprised to see that he could hold his liquor quite well. Zoro at one point had joined, and now it was just between the three of them as the rest of the participating village had either bowed out or passed out. The three seemed to be still going strong, although all were very obviously drunk. The three crewmates decided to call it a truce for now and headed for the lodging that had been accommodated for them by the village. Luffy and Nami, however, headed back towards Nijiko's home. On the way there, Luffy told Nami about Nijiko's plan. "So you knew, Luffy said, slurring his words a little. Your SSS sister. She wants to come with us. What do you mean, Luff? Nami asked, mispronouncing his name. She wants to be a pirate. He shouted the last part. Also something or other about Sanji. I forget. What about Sanji AI? Nami asked. For don't know when Naomi. Ask her. Luffy slurred back. This booze stuff is pretty great. Luffy thought to himself. Fine. I will. Not tonight, Thuwug. I'm tired. Nami said. Luffy nodded at that he was as well. And finally, they came across the cottage. There weren't any lights on, so either Nichiko was asleep or she wasn't here. They walked inside, and Luffy and Nami headed upstairs. Luffy made to walk into the room he had slept in before, but was surprised to see Nami was as well. Wait, is this your room, Nami? Luffy asked. Oh yeah, I slept on the couch last night. I suppose I could do that again. Nami said. Nanananu, Luffy said. I will sleep on the couch this time, he said as he made to move downstairs, but was stopped by Nami gripping his arm. We could both sleep here. The bed is big enough for two, Nami said, blushing a little bit. Had she been sober, she never would have asked for this, but with a bit of liquid courage and not thinking straight, she had asked. Sure, Luffy said. He didn't really think anything more to it than two nakama sharing sleeping arrangements. Nami, almost surprised at his easygoing nature, followed him into the room. Luffy hopped into bed first and slid over to one side as Nami almost reluctantly followed him. They both pulled up the covers, preparing to sleep. Nami was unsure about what was currently happening. She was glad that Luffy hadn't put any more thought into her intentions when she invited him to bed, but was unsure what that meant on their overall relationship. Was he just too innocent to fully understand the meaning of what was happening, or was he just so uninterested in her as a woman that he hadn't even considered it? Looking over, she saw him already snoozing quietly. Almost hesitantly, she touched her fingers to the scar that ran in an angry X across his chest. No one had asked him about it so far, but she had to admit she was curious. As she traced the X, she wondered whether he had always had it. Like it was some childhood accident of his, or if maybe it was something that was done to him in the future. And if so, what had caused it? But she decided she was too drunk to think on such depressing things as that. So with her hand still on Luffy's chest, she felt herself drifting off to sleep. Although as she did so, she heard a peculiar thumping noise in the background. But she didn't really think anything more of it before she finally closed her eyes and slept. The next morning, Nami found herself wrapped around some warm being. Her eyes snapped open at this as last night's memories became hazily clear. She had gone to bed with Luffy. Looking at the scene before her, she saw that currently she had her arms wrapped around Luffy, who was now facing away from her. She was currently pressed into his back, snuggled into this form. She slowly began to extract her arms from around him and started to get herself out of bed. Standing up, she looked at her captain, who still slept peacefully. She was glad that nothing else had happened, she thought, embarrassed to herself. Nami couldn't believe what she had asked of him. She knew that her feelings were likely a little more than just friendly towards her captain, but she wasn't sure enough of that to share a bed with him. She walked out of the room intending to get herself some coffee to start her day. However, she was greeted by her sister doing the same as she stepped out of her own room, closing the door behind her. Nami blushed as she quickly shut her door behind her. Nichiko raised an eyebrow as she noticed Nami looking embarrassed, but said nothing as she walked downstairs with her sister following. They had begun brewing coffee as the two sisters started talking about the party, although eventually the discussion came to Nichiko's decision to go with them. But Nichiko, what about the grove? I thought you wanted to look after it, Nami asked. Don't worry about the grove. I've already talked to a few people in the village. Genzo is going to help make sure that grove is taken care of, and the village is more than willing to help, Nichiko said. And it was that moment that someone could be heard coming down the stairs. Nami tensed up and ducked her face into her coffee cup. How the hell was she going to explain this to her sister? At the bottom of the stairs appeared Sanji, much to Nami's surprise. What or why? She started to say before her brain caught up with her. She thought back to that odd noise she heard before she fell asleep. No, she said, trailing off looking at her sister. Nichiko merely smiled back. What? She said with feigned confusion. Why you too? She stuttered out. Yup, Nichiko said bluntly. Sanji silently walked over and got himself some coffee as well, choosing to wisely stay out of this one between the sisters. So, you two are together then? Nami asked, looking between the two. I suppose ... ish. Nothing formal, I guess, Nichiko said. Sanji merely nodded. Hey, Sanji, you slept over too? A voice shouted from the stairwell. All three have turned in surprise to see Luffy. Luffy, Nami shouted while Sanji shouted Luffy. Nichiko merely laughed. So little sis, seems you had a guest of your own last night, I take it. Nami spluttered out, it's not how it looks. Luffy, confused, said. But Nami, you did invite me in last night, remember? Well yeah, but it's not what they think. Nami shouted at her clueless captain. But I slept over, just like Sanji did, right? Luffy asked. No, not like Sanji did, Nami shouted back. Luffy, somehow more confused now than he was before, merely pouted while he tried to figure out what was going on. Nami looking towards her sister. We didn't sleep together. Yeah, we did. Remember Nami? You and I slept together last night. Same bed and everything. You have a bad memory, Nami. Luffy interrupted. Nami at least had one of the questions she had last night answered. He was both too innocent and moronic to take the invitation to mean anything more than what it was. Nijiko was grinning madly at this point. It was really too cute, seeing her sister blushing a bright red while trying to explain herself while Luffy just kept digging a deeper hole for the two of them was too much. Sanji wisely was currently keeping his face in his coffee cup, drinking slowly. He still was avoiding getting involved. Don't worry sis, I know just what is going on, Nijiko said, winking to her sister. No you don't, she said, seeing the wink. It's okay Sanji, and I will keep your two's relationship a secret. Sanji nodded at this, spilling some coffee. Nami face faulted into the counter. This was way too annoying to explain with Luffy here. Luffy was still confused, thinking to himself why would the fact that they were nakama be a secret? But he merely sat down and looked at Sanji expectantly. If we weren't doing the same thing, then what were you doing here last night? Luffy asked his cook. Sanji started to cough, spilling the rest of his coffee on himself as he thought of a way to explain that. Well Luffy, Sanji and I were having sex, Nijiko said. And what's that? Luffy said, looking to Nijiko. All three were stunned. How did Luffy not know? They were all about the same age, and he was a pirate. Surely he would have figured that out by now. Nijiko, the first to recover, began to speak. Well Luffy, why don't you ask Nami to show you what it is? Sanji, who at the moment was currently trying to blend into the background at the moment, started to have a nosebleed. Okay, Luffy said, turning to Nami. He opened his mouth to ask but found her hand placed firmly over his mouth. Don't ask me that, Nami said, looking embarrassed at him. I will tell you what it is, she said, looking towards Nijiko with narrowed eyes. Outside, she finished as she grabbed him by the hand and led him outside. Nijiko calmly looked to Sanji, who was currently dabbing at his nose. Do you want a refresher on what sex is? She laughed. Then leaning into his side, she whispered into his ear. Or would you prefer a demonstration? Sanji's nosebleed returned full force as he found himself grinning and nodding his head fervently. And so the two headed upstairs to resume last night's activities. Outside, Nami was currently looking at her captain, who in turn was looking at her expectantly. So, Nami began, not sure how the best way to explain this was. Sex. It's something that is done between two people who love each other very much. Oh, so Sanji and Nijiko love each other, Luffy said. Nami said, not sure of that herself. That's none of our business. Love can be personal, between those involved, Nami said lamely. She didn't really want to explain what nakama with benefits were or whatever their relationship was. But, Luffy began to say, I love all of my nakama, so why won't you show me what sex is? Nami just stared at him. Blushing, she began to wonder if it really would be easier just to show him. Shaking her head, she started her explanation. There are different kinds of love, Luffy. Like the love between nakama is different than the kind of love that makes you want to have sex with someone. Oh, so it's like a mystery love then, Luffy said. Nami wasn't really sure how to explain that, but figured it would be easier to just say, yes, that's exactly it, Luffy. So, the love between us is different, right? Luffy said, and Nami merely nodded. So you don't want to have sex with me then? Luffy finished, looking innocently at Nami. Nami's blush returned as she thought of a way to answer. You would know the answer to that question if you had a deeper feeling of love between you and me than you would, let's say, between you and Zoro. She didn't really want to say either way, considering she wasn't even sure of her own feelings for her captain. So she figured it would be easiest if she left it at this. Oh okay, Luffy said, thinking about this. So if he loved someone more than a nakama, he would want to have sex with that person. Well, whatever sex was. So, if I decide I love someone more than a nakama, would they show me what sex is? Luffy asked Nami. And maybe it depends on whether that person loves you as much as you love them, Nami said. He thought he finally understood all this love and sex stuff. So if I decide I love you more than a nakama, and you say you love me more than a nakama, then you'll show me what sex is? Luffy asked. Nami, exhausted, said, yes, Luffy. If that happens, I'll show you what sex is. She hoped that would be the end of this. But don't tell anyone that, she said quickly. Okay, Luffy said. He was happy that he had sort of figured this stuff out, but he realized that he had a lot of thinking to do. What did it mean to love someone more than a nakama? He thought to himself. Nami had begun hearing thumps again from the direction of Nijiko's room. She noticed Luffy's ears perk up as well as he picked up on this. Before he could ask though, Nami suggested they go back to the village to see the rest of the crew. Hoping to avoid any further confusion, Nami told Luffy that if anyone asked where he was last night, to say that he had slept on Nami's couch. Luffy nodded at this, still stuck in his own thoughts. In the village, most people were just getting around. They were groggy after the previous night's occurrence. Some were just waking up from a drinking contest they hadn't been aware they lost. However, all conscious or unconscious were ready for another day without the rule of Arlong and another day of celebration. The Straw Hat crew had started to come around at this point as well. Zoro could be found looking between a restaurant and a bar. He decided eventually that he was too hungry to skip out for now, so he went to the restaurant. Zoro walked in to see Yuzop and Kaya already having lunch. They waved him over, and he sat down with them and ordered his food. They exchanged pleasantries, and all three had wondered where some of their crew had gotten to. Luffy and Sanji had apparently never turned into the house that had been set up for them. However, they found one of their missing persons when he walked in with Nami. They saw the others and joined them. "So Luffy, where'd you get to last night?" Zoro asked, sending the occasional glance Nami's way. She glared at the swordsman but said nothing. "Oh, I slept on the couch," Luffy said, smiling, and then looked towards Nami and gave her a thumbs up. Nami groaned as the three looked her way. "Yeah, he followed me back to my house because that's where he was put up after the fight. So he slept on the couch." The three seemed to not believe that, although they didn't ask any more questions. "Well, do you guys know where Sanji is?" "None of us have seen him." Luffy perked up at this. "Oh, we do." Nami shot a glance at Luffy. "He wouldn't," she thought. "He's been having sex with Nijiko," Luffy said confidently, grinning at his crew. Nami slammed her head down on the table with a loud groan. "He would." Yuzop, surprised at this declaration, said, "Wait, isn't that Nami's sister?" "He's all right, I guess that answers that." Luffy, still smiling without any real idea of what he was saying, gave a thumbs up in Nami's direction. She just groaned again. An awkward silence overcame them all. No one really knew how to carry the conversation from that point, and Luffy, while unaware of the awkwardness, was just happy to be with his crew. Yuzop and Kaya finished their meal and headed out while Zoro, Nami, and Luffy waited for their food. "So Luffy, where are we headed next then?" Zoro asked. "We have to go to Logtown now, and then after that reverse mountain, which will take us to the Grand Line," Luffy said excitedly. "Okay, sounds good, Luffy. Anything you think we should know?" Luffy thought of this. He thought of the attack of Buggy the Clown, as well as Smoker beginning his long pursuit of the Straw Hats. And finally, he thought of the father that he'd be seeing for the first time of this life. "No, you're probably good," Luffy said. Zoro nodded at that, although Nami was focused on the probably of what he said. "Probably?" Nami asked. "Probably," Luffy beamed back at her. Nami, although exasperated at first, smiled back. He may be a moron, but there's no one else she'd rather have as her captain. After leaving the restaurant, Zoro went on his own way to get something to drink. The villagers were currently setting up their stands for another day of celebration. Sanji and Nijiko had made it back to the village, and Sanji helped some of the cooks set up their own booths. Nami left Luffy, saying that she had some things to take care of back home. Luffy nodded at this and watched as she went. He couldn't help but feel that he did feel more strongly for her than his other nakama. He wasn't sure he liked the feeling. He felt guilty, like he was letting down his other nakama. Maybe it wasn't a bad thing, he thought to himself. However, his thoughts were interrupted as he noticed Genzo walking up to him. "Hey, kid, I need to talk to you," he said, and he indicated Luffy should follow him. So Luffy began heading in Genzo's direction. "I need to talk to you about Nami," Genzo said, looking at Luffy seriously. Right now they were at the docks where the Going Merry was now docked. "I've seen her smile for the first time in a long time when she's with you, so I wanted to thank you for that. She's lived a hard life," he said, trailing off. "I know," Luffy said sadly. "Good. The only other thing I really wanted to say is that when you leave the island with her, keep her happy, or I'll kill you," he said with as much menace as he could muster for the savior of their village. Luffy smiled at this. "I promise, old man. I'll make sure Nami's happy." Genzo nodded happily, and the two returned to the village. The islanders were currently in full swing of their second straight day of party. However, unbeknownst to them, their heroes were now sneaking off the island. Nami and Nijiko had decided to leave the money that Nami had saved at their old home. Genzo, when he went to help tend the groves, would find the note and the money that was meant for the village. Nami and Nijiko didn't really want to have a long, sad goodbye with their village, so they decided to sneak out while the town was still at its happiest. There are only 4 people who were waiting at the dock for them: the bounty hunter duo, Genzo, and Dr. Nako. The bounty hunter duo had decided to stay behind. It was time for them to begin bounty hunting again, and they joked that if they were seen with pirates, they were going to lose their fame. Genzo and Dr. Nako were sorry to see the 2 girls go, but they were happy that they were finally going to live life on their own terms. Bellemere would be proud of her girls, they thought, and smiled to themselves. They had gathered some supplies together that Genzo and Dr. Nako had helped them gather earlier that day, and after loading up the ship, they began their departure. They waved their goodbyes to the only ones who knew they were leaving. It had been fun traveling with the bounty hunters, and the girls would miss their island, but they knew they had to move on and were happy to do so. Nami was currently looking at the maps and plotting a course for Logtown. Following Luffy's advice made the most sense. Logtown was a popular destination before heading to the Grand Line, and with the last king of the pirates beginning and ending there, it made sense why Luffy was excited to see it again. They could also restock and pick up needed supplies that they would need for their journey to the Grand Line. Reverse Mountain was going to be a rough ride, she had heard. Nijiko was watching as her village receded into the distance. She had never left the island before and was surprised she had actually worked up the courage to do so. Although looking at the odd man next to her, she supposed he might have had something to do with it. Sanji was currently smoking his cigarette. As he watched Nijiko, "You know, if we keep doing whatever we're doing, I'm not going to tolerate you treating me like a princess all the time, right?" Nijiko said calmly to Sanji. He nodded at that. "I know." He had a hard time getting over it at first, but Nijiko had been different from the start. He realized she had demanded that he treat her like everyone else from the beginning. Sanji wasn't really sure what was going on between the two of them, but for now, he knew that he enjoyed what he had with Nijiko, so he was happy enough to comply. Zoro was currently napping on deck. Yuzop and Kaya were currently talking by one of the railings, wondering where they were headed next. The Straw Hats were now sailing towards Logtown. On their way there, a messenger bird landed on their ship. Nami paid the bird the fee and got the newspaper, although she complained about the price. "Don't you think your place charges a little much?" she said, glaring at the bird. "Raise it again, and I'll stop buying it," she threatened. The bird merely saluted, then turned and flew away towards its next potential customer. "What's the big deal?" Yuzop asked. "We've got a ton of treasure." "Well, when you buy it every day it adds up," Nami said back. Yuzop said, "You know, you don't have to obsess about money so much now that you're not trying to earn money for your village, right? Now that everything's over, I'm going to earn money for me now," Nami said, pointing at Yuzop. "I don't want to be some poor pirate who can't even dress up. Now let's see if there's anything good today," Nami murmured to herself as she settled down in her deck chair. The first page, her eyes widened. On the front page was a bounty of her captain, and below the picture was his new bounty, 50 million berries. Nami shouted, causing the crew to look at her. "What's 50 million berries, Nami?" Nijiko asked her sister. "Luffy's new bounty. It says here that he is accredited with the defeat of Buggy, Kuro, Krieg, and finally Arlong." "Cool," Luffy shouted. "Let me see," he said, running over to Nami to see his new bounty. And sure enough, there was his picture plastered above the 50 million berry reward. Looking at the picture, he saw it was the one that Fullbody had taken, laughing as he saw he was picking his nose. "Oh, Kami," Nami said to herself. Anytime anyone thought of the Straw Hat Pirates, they would think of their moron captain picking his nose. The rest of the crew gathered to see as well, some laughing at the picture while others thought about the consequences of having such a high bounty before they even entered the Grand Line. But in the end, they could only guess what could come their way, and so they continued on to their next destination. Soon the young pirate crew found themselves at the docks of Logtown. This was the first time for some of them to see a town so big, namely Yuzop, Kaya, and Nijiko. Having grown up in small villages themselves, never even leaving the island, this was by far the largest town they'd ever seen. The pirates decided to split up and do their own shopping. Zoro headed off by himself, wanting to find a swordsmith to replace the swords he had lost. He had only been able to borrow some swords from the villagers before, but had given them back. Plus, with the money Nami lent him, he hoped would be able to get some higher quality swords than the ones he had before. Yuzop and Kaya set out on their own, promising to meet up with the rest of the crew later. Sanji and Nijiko left as well. Sanji had to pick up food and other ingredients for his cooking, and Nijiko had no real plans of her own, so she followed along. Nami convinced Luffy to go along with her. She wanted to get his opinion on some clothes, and she said she'd treat him to lunch if he came along, so he agreed. Plus, she said they'd stop by the execution platform like he wanted to. Unknown to the Straw Hats, the local marine base had received the bounty of the soon-to-be infamous Straw Hat Luffy. They had just gotten word, however, that they were also supposedly heading to Logtown. Smoker could be seen sitting in his office with the 50 million berry bounty. He was looking at the list of pirates the boy was said to have defeated. These were big-time pirates that had been terrorizing the East Blue for years, and Kuro was one that he was surprised to see. It had apparently come out that a corrupt captain of the Marines had apparently lied about executing the pirate years ago. Funny enough, that same captain was apparently brought down by none other than Straw Hat Luffy as well. He looked through the reports and was surprised at the seemingly good deeds this crew had done. They had taken out all of the big-time pirates in East Blue and seemed to make many allies along the way. But it was no matter. If the Straw Hats stepped in this town, he would bring them in, no question. Even though the pirate in question had a devil fruit, he had a weapon that could take even them down. Looking out his window, he wondered when they would show up and if the reports would hold true that they would come today. However, he didn't have much time to think about it as one of his men came rushing in. "Captain, we have word that pirates have appeared at the port," the crew member said, saluting his captain, Smoker. Smoker, putting on his jacket and strapping his weapon to his back, walked out of his office. With a bounty that high, this pirate was likely to put up a serious fight. He was starting to look forward to it. He ignored his frantic subordinates. They shouldn't worry about a pirate as long as he was there to take care of it, although he had to wonder where Tashigi had gotten to. Zoro could be seen looking into a window, lamenting on his current financial situation. There was no way he could afford any of these swords. He remembered back onto the tremendous amount of interest Nami was planning on charging him. Although he was grateful, his captain had managed to talk it down a bit, even if it was now only 200%. But still, he'd be in debt to the girl forever at the prices they were charging for the swords in front of him. However, he noticed a crowd had begun to form behind him. "Awa, shut up. Our boss is behind bars all thanks to him." A shout could be heard over the crowd. Zoro began to make his way over to see what was going on. "Have you still not learned your lesson?" "Nope. We ain't happy with things as they are. We're gonna bring your corpse to him to see." Zoro was surprised to see two thugs towering over a girl in glasses. "Very well, I will fight you," the girl countered back. The pirates began to laugh at that. "You will, girlie," said one, and the other said, "Don't make us laugh. What can a girl possibly do?" Zoro, hearing this, began to unsheath his sword. He was sick of hearing their nonsense. He made towards them, starting to draw his sword from its sheath when he was surprised to see the girl make the first move. The two thugs had started to bring down their swords on the smaller girl, ready to kill her. The girl dropped the item she had been carrying to reveal it had been a sword in a wrapped sheath, which she drew and struck down the men before they could even begin to react. The two men collapsed to the ground due to their wounds. Zoro stood in shock. He hadn't even realized she'd been armed. The crowd around him began cheering on the young woman. However, that was before she tripped and fell on her face, dropping her glasses. Zoro sheathed his sword and made to help the girl up. He picked up the glasses as he heard the crowd begun a mix of cheering for her victory and jeering for her clumsiness. He walked over to her, intending to give her back her glasses, when the girl looked up at him. He looked at her and could only see Kuina. With his surprise, he accidentally snapped the glasses. After his initial shock, Zoro could see the differences in her face, although they were scarily similar. The girl had begun to thank him but was interrupted when she heard the shattering of her glasses. "My glasses," she shouted at him. I didn't mean to," he shouted back. "Those were expensive. How could you do something so horrible?" "I told you, I didn't mean to. Pay me back for them," she demanded, getting in his face. Zoro was sweating. He definitely didn't have the money to pay both this girl back and buy his swords. Luffy and Nami could be seen heading towards one of the clothing shops near where they had left the others. Luffy had only two destinations in mind: to see that old man at the bar again and to see the execution platform once more. He thought it was weird Nami wanted him to go clothes shopping, but he accepted. He didn't really remember how to get around this place anyway, so it'd probably be better this way. He had given Nami his hat again. He didn't really want people to immediately recognize him, and his hat probably would have given him away. After all, with Smoker on the lookout for him, he might have actually taken the time to look at his bounty this time. If he didn't see him wearing a straw hat, he might not make the connection immediately. Nami began showing him a bunch of different outfits, although he didn't really see the point. He thought Nami looked good the way she already was and told her that. She blushed but said that it wasn't good to wear the same outfit all the time. When they had walked in, the man at the counter had tried to hang up his straw hat that Nami was wearing. He had gotten angry at first, but Nami had stopped the dude from touching the hat. She told him that whatever outfits she got had to look good with the hat. The salesman was confused but agreed and began trying to find some outfits that would match well. In the end, she decided that the dude was too greasy of a salesman and began looking elsewhere, much to the man's annoyance. But with a glare from Luffy, the man quickly stopped his complaining. The two were headed off in the direction of the main street to find some more agreeable clothing stores. Yuzop and Kaya began exploring the island. Each had their own shopping to do but had chosen to spend some time together as well. The two had started holding hands as soon as they got out of sight from the rest of their crew. They weren't really keeping anything secret from their nakama, but they just wanted to explore their own feelings before having it be brought to the crew's attention. Kaya spotted a store advertising medicinal supplies, and the two headed into the store. Within, they noticed the vast amounts of hanging dried herbs and the medical texts lining the walls and bookshelves. Hearing the ding of the doorbell as the two walked in, an elderly man walked out from the back of the store. He greeted the two browsing customers and said he was willing to help them with anything they might need. Kaya thanked him as they continued looking. She picked out some texts and headed over to the shop owner. "Ah, so are you studying to be a doctor?" the man said knowingly. "Yes, although I'm sailing with," she said, looking towards Yuzop, "Nakama, and I'm the only one with medical experience, even if it's mostly self-taught." "Ah, I see," the man said, stroking his bushy beard. "May I ask the two of you something?" he asked. "Sure," Kaya said, shrugging. Yuzop merely shrugged as well. Nodding, the man continued saying, "Are the two of you by any chance pirates?" he asked. The two were surprised and looked at each other nervously. Was this guy going to try and turn them in? Should they run? They thought to themselves, seeing the worry on the two's face. He tried to reassure them. "I am not asking because I wish to turn you in. I have had many nakama in the past that were pirates themselves, although I was never one myself. I was only asking because the two of you certainly aren't Marines and you didn't look like the kind of folk to be hired workers on a merchant ship." The two were relieved a bit, and the tension visibly left their shoulders. Yes, we are. Although we are admittedly not really seasoned ones. It's really only been a few weeks since we left our home, to be honest, Kaya told the friendly man. Ah, I could have guessed. So what makes you want to be a pirate doctor? It seems like it would be easier to find someone to apprentice under on an island somewhere than to do it alone. The man said, looking to Kaya. Well, I didn't want to just stay put on my island. I wanted to go on adventures with him, she said, looking to Yuzop. So even if it was easier to do so, I couldn't become someone's apprentice. But the reason I wanted to be a doctor was, well, I've always wanted to help people. Being on a pirate ship means there's a lot of danger, Kaya said, trailing off. The old man nodded at this. He knew what the seas could be like for pirates. But I want to be able to protect my nakama. But I'm not really strong enough, nor do I really want to hurt people. So I thought that the best way to do that was to become a doctor. And I find that I do really enjoy the work, although I worry that maybe I'm not helping enough. Kay finished, looking down sadly. Kaya, don't say that. You're a great help to the crew. Zoro likely would never have made it if it weren't for you, Yuzop said, looking at Kaya with concern. I know, Yuzop. But still, seeing you guys fight and getting hurt while I just stand there waiting to patch you up when you do, it makes me worry that I'm not doing enough, Kaya said, looking at Yuzop. So you want to be strong enough to help your nakama, but you don't really want to fight, the old man said, looking at Kaya. Kaya nodded at the old man's statement but felt a little foolish at his observation. I think I have something that could help you, the man said as he turned and headed into the back room again. They could hear the man shuffling things around and wondered what he was getting. And soon the old man shuffled back to the counter, this time with a small chest in his hands. He set it on the table, putting his hand on the lid. This was given to me a long time ago by a man that I once saved the life of. Later I found out the man was actually a pirate, and he said that while he couldn't pay me in money, he could give me this instead, he said as he slowly opened the lid to reveal a strange fruit. Is that a devil fruit? Yuzop asked, pointing at the fruit. The man nodded at this, confirming Yuzop's suspicion. It was a primarily white fruit with swirls that ended in a light blue color. It was shaped like a pear, with the stem being the same bright blue color as the swirls. That man told me that this fruit was something that would fit a man of my profession. He didn't really say much more than that, but I trust him. He was a good man and not one to lie. While I can't promise what it will do, I can say that I think it will help you on your journey. Why did you never eat it then? Kaya asked. Believe me, I considered many times doing exactly that. I also considered selling it many times. But I think the man that gave me it would have frowned on that. The old man trailed off, thinking of his old nakama. However, as the years went by, I simply saved it. I never had the courage myself to eat it, and in all honesty, I probably wouldn't have had much use for it. I've spent my entire life as a doctor on this island. I have a family here, and I've lived a good full life, he said, smiling fondly. But I'm an old man now, and I have no use for such a thing. I could never sell it and would have no use for the money even if I did. He pulled out the fruit and held it in front of him. If you want it, you can have it, the man said to Kaya. I can't promise how useful it will be, but I trust the man who gave it to me. That is all I can promise. Kaya reached out and picked up the fruit in her hand. It looked oddly beautiful for being something called a devil fruit. She examined it as she held it. A fruit that would be useful to a doctor. What could it do then? She assumed it must have something to do with healing, or else it probably wouldn't be helpful to a doctor. But she had no way of really knowing. She looked to Yuzop to see his opinion. He wasn't sure he could help. How about this? I can understand your hesitation to take the fruit, but like I said, I have no use for it. Take it. If you don't eat it, that's fine. I would completely understand. I couldn't eat it myself. But please just take it with you. It would only gather dust here. How about you just buy some supplies here and we'll call it even, the old man said, smiling. Kaya thought about it, then nodded happily. Sure, I can do that. So the duo picked up the books and supplies, and Kaya stashed the fruit in her bag. Saying their goodbyes, they exited the shop, moving on to their next destination. I think Roger would be happy with who I gave the fruit to, the old man said as he disappeared into the back of his store. Sanji and Najiko could be seen checking out some of the local fishermen's stores. Najiko was not too pleased to be surrounded by the smell of dead fish, but Sanji promised to be done with it soon and take her somewhere better smelling. After selecting the fish, he had some men deliver it to their ship. He carried through on his promise to Najiko then and took her to the main street, where they found grocery stores, restaurants, and clothing stores. Sanji picked through some of the stores and got what ingredients he needed for the coming journey. And once again he had them deliver it to their ship so he could enjoy his day with Najiko. Najiko, seeing some of the higher class clothing stores in the area, decided that it was her turn to pick their destination. Standing in front of a lingerie store, she thought that Sanji probably wouldn't mind. Nami was telling one of the shop workers what their ship looked like so they could drop off her purchases. Nami had picked out some clothes with the help of Luffy. Although he really only said no to a couple outfits, he had to admit she had looked outstanding in some of them. He felt a strange feeling in his gut when he looked at Nami sometimes. He wasn't really sure what it meant, but he wondered if it had anything to do with love. He decided to keep it to himself though. He remembered talking about it seemed to embarrass Nami, so he figured that maybe he should figure it out on his own. Nami asked if he had anything he wanted to do. He thought back to the Gold Roger bar and looked around. The bar had been in one of the alleys off of the main street, and he soon found the alley he was looking for. "Where are we going, Luffy?" she asked. "There's a bar around here that we need to see." Gold Roger himself drank here and decided to go on his journey to the Grand Line from this very bar. Nami had to admit that would be interesting to see, although as she stood in front of the bar that Luffy had brought her, so she thought the place looked abandoned. But Luffy was right, the sign said Gold Roger with bar written in smaller letters above. They walked down the stairs, and Nami still agreed with her earlier assessment. It was dark, and there were old torn-up wanted posters covering the walls of the stairwell. As they entered, Nami looked around, seeing all the tables with stacked chairs. "Luffy, this place doesn't seem open," she said, although she was surprised to see an old man in the corner drinking next to a giant skull. "You work here, old guy?" Luffy asked, smiling. "Scram," the old man said. "This ain't a place for runts like you two," he said, glaring at the youngsters. "The sides were closed for good as of today," he said, pouring himself another drink. "Did you go under?" Nami asked the old man. "It didn't go under. I'm shutting it down myself," the old man shouted indignantly. "Now get lost." However, as he said this, Luffy walked over to the last bar stool at the end and sat down facing the man at the back of the bar. Nami was tempted to say that they should leave, but figured Luffy knew what he was doing. Or at least she hoped he did, and followed him, sitting on the next stool over. "I was just curious about the name. That's all," Luffy said. What's that giant skull on your table?" Nami asked, pointing towards the skull. "This is what became of a guy once known as Killer Giant," the guy said, looking at the skull. "A villain who sent hundreds of pirates to the afterlife. But Gold Roger sent him to his grave with just one blow." The old man smiled. "Gold Roger did?" Luffy asked. "With truly lightning speed," the old man shouted. "This guy was famous for the absurdly huge blade he used, but their fight ended in the blink of an eye." He pointed, drink in hand, at the stab wound at the center of the giant skull. "And this is the wound he received. But he was an infamous scoundrel himself." With his dying breath, he muttered, "Roger, my hat's off to you. May you have honor as the eternal pirate." "So awesome, so cool," Luffy shouted. Eric Down, the man known as King Silver, the world's greatest gunman. The Giant Gowns brothers. They were all tough men who were as feared as demons. But for Gold Roger, they were as weak as infants. Nami couldn't help but think that the old man might as well as have been describing her own captain instead of Gold Roger. "Would you like to hear more?" the old man asked, looking at the two. "Yeah," Luffy replied. "Very few people these days believe this story, you know." Nami believed them, oddly enough. Having seen what her captain could do, it wasn't so hard to find that the once king of the pirates had done great things as well. "That's okay. Just tell me," Luffy told the old man. "Hold your horses," the old guy said grumpily. Gold Roger, in those days, no, even still, I guess, he was the one and only man who didn't fear the Grand Line. Nami let out a small laugh accidentally at that. The old man glared at her. "What, you don't believe me?" Gold Roger was. No, I believe you, it's just," she said, trailing off while looking at Luffy. "He isn't the only one who isn't afraid of the Grand Line," she finished confidently. "Oh," the old man said, surprised. "Yeah," Luffy replied. "We're going to the Grand Line, too." "Huh, Gold Roger's so cool. He's how a pirate should be. That's why I set out to sea. I'm gonna go to the Grand Line, get the One Piece, and be king of the pirates. And Nami's going to help me do it. She's gonna draw a map of all the world's oceans." Nami smiled at this as they both confidently looked back at the man. The old man was surprised. When he looked at Luffy, he could only think of the man that had once set out from this very bar and conquered the Grand Line. He got the same feeling from this boy as he did Roger on that day. Those are some mighty big words. And in this bar, of all places, he only said what he meant, Nami said. And Luffy grinned again at this. "If there are still patrons like you two out there, maybe I'll hold off on closing this place." The old man walked behind the bar. "I haven't been in such a good mood since then. I'll treat you two to a drink." The old man poured the two some rum and poured a glass for himself as well. They toasted and downed their drinks. The old man thinking about his old Nakama and how it seemed that this boy might actually claim his Nakama's title. Nami was thinking about how she and Luffy were going to travel the world and that she was going to finally draw her map, but on her own terms now. Luffy thought about the loss he had faced in the past, but he looked towards the future. There were only a few people that could stand in his way this time around. He was going to make sure he was strong enough that they never would. On an unknown island on the Grand Line, Dracula Mihawk had just landed. Nearby he could see the ship of an old Nakama of his. He started to walk up the beach when some low-level pirates began quivering at the sight of him. He walked up to one and said, "Take me to your captain." The man was shaking all over, and it took all the courage he had to nod his head and take off in the direction of his captain. Soon Mihawk was at their main campsite and could see his old nakama clutching his head, likely working off a hangover. "Hey there, Hawkeye, what a rare visitor. I'm not feeling so good at the moment. Have you come to fight me? I don't have any intention of settling things with you now that you've lost your left arm." He reached into his jacket as he searched for something. "I found an interesting group of pirates, and was suddenly reminded of a story you used to tell," he said this as he withdrew the scroll he had been keeping in his pocket. He walked over to red-haired Shanks as he began to unfurl it. A story about an interesting boy from a certain small village. As he looked at the bounty, his eyes widened. "You don't mean..." The others in his crew perked up at this. The description from Hawkeye could only mean one thing. Luffy had made his debut. "So you've made it, Luffy," Shanks said, grinning widely. "And a bounty that high to start with." He looked at the picture of the Straw Hat Kid that he had left all those years ago. Luffy looked a little older than Shanks thought he would. But that's life on the sea for you, he supposed. He had not changed all that much though, seeing him with his finger in his nose. He laughed. It would be Luffy to have such a high bounty with such an innocent expression on his face. "That kid surprises me, Shanks," Mihawk said simply as he held the drink Shanks had poured for him. "His powers are impressive, and he had strange sort of wisdom about him." Shanks, who was currently midway through a swig of his own drink, spat out in surprise wisdom. "Luffy, are you sure you're talking about the kid in the bounty here?" he said, pointing to the picture. "I did say it was strange wisdom, didn't I? You can see him acting like that without a care in the world one moment. But then I saw the look in his eyes as he helped one of his nakama. They were eyes that have seen some dark things," Mihawk said seriously. "And there's that scar the boy has. I'd be interested to know how he got such a violent-looking scar." "PFFT. That scar's no big deal," Shanks said, laughing. He had been a little disturbed to hear Mihawk describe Luffy that way, but when he heard him talking about that tiny scar under his eye like it was life-threatening, he knew Mihawk was just reading way too much into things. He got that trying to prove that he was brave enough to be a pirate. He laughed as his crew joined him, remembering the incident. "What?" Mihawk said, surprised. "That huge jagged red X had been gained as a child." "Yeah," Shanks said, laughing. "We had been making fun of him when we started, saying that he wasn't tough enough to be a pirate. But the moron takes a dagger and sticks it under his eye to prove he was tough. He cried like a baby afterward, of course, and we had to patch him up." "You moron. That's not the scar I'm talking about," Mihawk said, annoyed. "I'm talking about the one that looks like someone burned something across his chest. It's a giant red X across his chest." "Wait, what?" Shanks said, genuinely surprised. His crew shut up at this as well. What had happened to Luffy? "Well, I don't know anything about it. I didn't really have time to ask. Straw Hat seemed to have a little war going on between himself and Don Krieg, so I left. I watched his fight from afar, however," Mihawk said. "Well, alright, that's understandable, but how was he in a fight? Was he good?" Shanks asked enthusiastically. He was more than a little worried about what he had learned about Luffy. What had given him that scar, he wondered. "He's powerful, surprisingly so, to be honest, someone raised in East Blue. He's got a strong crew, but I don't think any of them really compare against Luffy." "Oh well, that's a shame then about his crew, but I'm glad to hear Luffy's tough at least. He'll have to be tough if he wants to survive the Grand Line," Shanks said, finishing off his glass. "No, I did not say that Luffy's crew was weak, I just said that they didn't compare to Luffy." "What do you mean?" Shanks asked. He knew Luffy was going to become the greatest of pirates one day, but he assumed he wouldn't be all that strong yet. "He fought Don Krieg with ease, which to someone of our skill isn't saying much, but there were times where I felt he was just holding back so he wouldn't kill the man," Mihawk said seriously. "Those powers of his, they could really do some damage in the hands of a less capable pirate," Mihawk said, looking at the bottom of his mug. "I didn't see much of this, mind you, but I witnessed an impressive control over haki, which shouldn't be possible for someone with no training in such a skill. And growing up in East Blue to boot. I don't suppose you had anything to do with training the kid?" Mihawk asked, looking at Shanks. "No, haki you say. Where'd he learn that, I wonder?" Shanks said, rubbing his goatee. "That's not even the half of it. Luffy seems to be teaching his crew as well to control it." "Really? Now that was impressive. Luffy teaching. Scary thought that was. I fought a swordsman that was on his crew. While he was no match for me at the time, I know he has the drive to one day surpass me." Now Shanks had been seriously surprised to hear this. Mihawk saying one day there was going to be a better swordsman than him. He thought he'd never see the day. But what surprised me most is that when it truly counted, the swordsman was able to draw on both observational and armament haki. He was able to destroy the dagger I had in my necklace because of it. Shanks thought on that. Someone had impressed Mihawk to the point where he thought he would one day surpass. And the man had bested him when he had been armed only with a knife, admittedly. And he wasn't even close to Luffy's strength. "Did you see anyone else in the crew?" "Yes, there were 2 girls in his crew. I can't say much for them though. One seems to be the ship's doctor though, but beyond that, I don't know any of their skills." "Oh, and one was a long-nosed boy. Bushy black hair. but again I never saw any of them in action. Mihawk said. Yuzop perked up at the last part. Could it be? He muttered. Did his son become a pirate just like his father? Mihawk, could you describe the boy with the long nose a little more? A name maybe? Yuzop asked. Mihawk thought about it and tried to describe the boy as best he could, although he had never heard a name to connect with the face. Gee, that might be my son. The description fits him perfectly when he was a small child. But maybe I'm wrong. Yuzop looked at his captain seriously. Captain, could I ask a favor? Yuzop asked. Shanks nodded and listened to his sniper. He thought about his request, and after some thought smiled. I think that's something we can do, Yuzop, Shanks said, smiling to his crew. They gave a cheer as they continued to party. Mihawk gathered himself. It was time he headed on his way. Hanging out with pirates was not exactly his favorite activity, and so without a word he headed back to his boat. Shanks watched him go for a few seconds but then turned his eyes towards where the east blew, and grinned again widely. This was going to be interesting. The old man watched the two go. He was glad that he met those two. It gave him hope for the future, that there are still brave people out there willing to fight for their dreams. He laughed to himself as he wiped the mugs clean. He wondered if Roger was looking down at that boy with that smile of his. But he was interrupted from his musings when a Marine came in demanding he hang a new bounty. Fine, give it here, boy. He glared at the Marine as he grabbed the poster. Grabbing a hammer and nail, he went to tack it in the wall when he got a look at the picture. He laughed again and decided to hang this one somewhere special. He stuck it up behind the bar where at one point he had displayed Gold Roger's bounty as well. Do us, proud kid. Achieve your dream, he said, smiling. Then he watched a couple of men dressed in cloaks wandered into his bar, being followed by a young woman. The two men sat down at one of his tables, and the one with the clown nose drew a deck of cards and began shuffling them. They demanded drinks, and he figured if he was going to keep this bar open he might as well. He grabbed a bottle and a couple of glasses and put them on the table. Then he walked over to his table and sat down again, sipping his own drink. I knew it, Red Nose said, grinning under his hood. The cards say that detestable runt is already in this town. The time for revenge has flashily come at last. So, do you successfully take his life? The woman in the cowboy hat asked. Obviously, the man said as he laid down his last card. The one who dies is, and he revealed a card with his own face on it. Oh, it's you. The woman laughed. The man slammed his head down on the table. It was then that the man with the blue checkered scarf began visibly shaking. He lifted a hand to point at something behind the bar. See, Captain, it's him, he said simply. Alvida and Buggy turned towards the bar and saw what he was talking about. Alvida walked closer. 50 million berries. Why doesn't that surprise me? She said, smiling. Buggy stared at it, getting pissed off. He was going to do whatever it took to kill that bastard today. Then the people would know that he was a great pirate to be feared. It was time to get out of here anyway. Alvida left some money to cover the drinks, and they went out the way they came. The old man laughed. It looked like that man made enemies and allies wherever he went. On a day like today, it just seemed to fit, he thought. Zoro was currently being led down the street by Tashigi, who was angrily walking ahead of him. Where exactly are we going? Zoro yelled after her. You broke my glasses. I told you, I'll pay you back. Somehow, you don't look like you would have any money. Something about you just seems off. True, I don't have any money, but those wrinkles between your eyes, Tashigi said as she walked up to the swordsman. That look of having eaten nothing for days. Tashigi continued to stare him down. Do you have a sick mother? Did your wife run out on you and leave you with 5 babies to nurse? Where the hell did she get that? Zoro thought to himself. Oh look, you, he said, getting in her face. She turned and began leading him again. I won't ask for details. Just come with me. He continued following her until she calmly walked into a Marine base. He stood outside a little nervous. The Marines. As he followed her inside, he watched as she pulled something out of a supply closet. She handed him a bucket and mop and smiled at him. The cleaning man just quit his job. If you work for the Marines, you'll never need to worry about money. You're a fortunate person, she said with a smile. Zoro was visibly annoyed at this point. Screw that. Why should I work for the Navy? Zoro shouted. You're just going to run off, Tashigi said, looking at him angrily. You're insulting a person's kindness. Maybe your poor spirit's more of an issue than your money problem, she shouted back. Look, you. Zoro began to reply but was interrupted by another Marine. Sergeant Major, it's time for training. He saluted to his superior. Bye. Please work hard, okay, she said, leaving Zoro with the mop and bucket. Sergeant Major, Zoro said, surprised. He began doing chores around the place, wondering how he got stuck doing this job. He was currently taking out the trash when he noticed 2 people staring at him. Zoro began sweating a little bit. Just pretend you don't see anything, Luffy, Nami said as she pulled Luffy along. But why is he taking out the Marines' trash, Nami? Luffy said, looking confused in Zoro's direction. It's none of our business, Luffy, let's just get out of here. Okay, Luffy said happily following his navigator. Damn it, Zoro thought to himself, not only was he doing these stupid chores but his captain and that greedy woman had seen him as well. Zoro, annoyed, walked back inside looking at all the work he was supposed to do. Angrily, he grabbed 3 mops and used his signature sword style to swab the floors with surprising efficiency. At some point, Zoro found himself at the training grounds as he watched the woman fight several Marines at once. Seeing her fight and beat everyone with ease, he had a hard time distinguishing her with Kuina. It was then that 2 Marines came up to him with hands on their swords prepared to draw. "What are you doing here?" one said, while the other followed with, "I knew it. You're pirate hunter Zoro. Why the hell are you cleaning? Intel has it that you've teamed up with Monkey D. Luffy's crew. You're under arrest," one said as he started to pull the sword from its sheath. However, Zoro was faster. Before the man could draw his swords, he launched himself at the Marines, knocking both of them out with 2 swings of the broom. "Well, now what?" Zoro said, looking around. Later, some Marines noticed the unconscious bodies and alerted the sergeant major. Tashigi saw a note as well as a stack of money. Taking both, she read the letter which said, "For your glasses." She read aloud, looking around for the man who had done this. Zoro could be seen walking down the street still looking for a swordsmith. "Man, that freaked me out. Damn it. She looks way too much like Kuina. Not to mention she's a swordsman, of all things. The world sure is a big place, but I doubt I'll ever see her again." However, he saw a shop that should have what he needed. It had weapons decorating the outside, so he walked in to find a sleeping shopkeeper staffing the store. "I'd like some swords," Zoro said, looking at the man. The man woke with surprise but got over it quickly. Yes, welcome. Have a look at anything you'd like," the man said, wringing his hands together. "Our shop's been in business for over 200 years, you see." Zoro put the measly wad of cash he had been left with after leaving money for Tashigi. "I got 100,000 berries. Sell me 2 swords. 2 swords for 100,000 berries," the man said, surprised. His excitement at having a customer quickly turned to annoyance. Damn, he has no money, he thought to himself. 50,000 a sword'll only get you some dull blades, the man said, bored. "I'll make do with whatever. I just don't have any money," Zoro said. "You'll make do with whatever. HMPH, what an amateur," the man thought to himself. However, he then spied the sword at Zoro's waist. That sword, could it be? Hold on. Let me see that sword of why yours," the man said, shaking and sweating profusely. "What are you all fidgety for?" Zoro demanded. "Just let me see it," the man demanded. "Weirdo," Zoro said, but he handed his sword over. He withdrew the sword from its sheath a little bit to confirm his suspicions. This really is it," the man thought, shock visible in his features. Trying to get himself to calm down, he knew this was his chance. An amateur like this guy didn't even know what he had. "Wow, that's not a bad sword," the man said. "What do you say? I'll buy this from you for 200,000 berries," the man said, grinning and sweating a little bit. Zoro, annoyed, grabbed the sword from the salesman. "Not for sale," he glared at the man. Wait, I'll raise the price. How much do you want for it?" the man shouted. He was desperate at this point. "Not for sale," Zoro repeated, glaring at the salesman. "Now where are the swords for 50,000 berries?" "Hello." Suddenly they were interrupted by Tashigi running into the shop. "Did you finish polishing my Shiger?" she asked. Tashigi, noticing the swordsman from before, said to him, "Thank goodness. You're all right. Someone went on a rampage at the Navy outpost earlier," she said, looking concerned at him. "You were gone too, so I was worried." Zoro was sweating at this point, looking at the girl. He was thankful she hadn't made the connection though. "But the fact that you're here safe and sound means you actually scoffed at my kindness and ran off." She gave him back his money. "I can't accept money from someone who's heartless. Besides, I bought some new glasses," Tashigi said, putting them on. She looked back at the man and noticed the sword in his hand. "Is that sword the Wado Ikemanji?" she shouted with surprise. She grabbed it from him, inspecting it for herself. "It is the Wado Ikemanji." She drew the blade. "What a beautiful straight temper line," she said with amazement. "I believe it's one of the 21 Azumano swords." She sheathed the sword as she handed it back. Withdrawing a small book, she began looking for the right page. "See, look at this. It's worth no less than 10 million berries." She looked surprised at the swordsman. "But what are you doing with such a legendary sword?" The salesman was annoyed at this point. Although it seemed that he wasn't going to make a sale in the first place, it was still annoying that the amateur now knew the value of his blade. "It's true. That sword's so legendary it'd be a waste for a guy who doesn't know its value to walk around with it. This sword means more to me than my own life," Zoro said, staring the salesman down. "So don't tell me I don't know its value." The salesman began sweating again. He could feel the anger being leveled at him. All right. Look, those barrels over there have swords worth 50,000 each. Just take 2 and leave." Tashigi was surprised to hear what Zoro had said. Why did that sword mean so much to him? She thought to herself. She looked towards the salesman, who was currently digging under the counter for her sword. "Here." He handed Tashiga's Shiger to her. Your sword's polished, he said, leveling her a glare. Tashigi thanked him and walked over to the swordsman. You must really like swords, carrying 3 of them around, she said. That's almost like this one bounty hunter out there, she said. Bounty hunter, huh? Zoro said. He's famous. His name is Roronoa, Tashigi said. I hear the name a lot, Zoro said cheekily. Yes, Roronoa is a famous swordsman all throughout the East Blue, but he's a notorious person. She finished, looking a little angry. Using swords as bounty hunting tools is unforgivable. Why is evil so strong in this era? All the famous sword masters are pirates or bounty hunters, and almost all of the world's legendary swords are in their hands, she lamented. It's a real shame, she finished. Zoro was a little annoyed at this. He had seen evil among all kinds of people. Pirates, bounty hunters, ordinary people, and marines. You know, not all pirates and bounty hunters are bad, Zoro said, still rustling through the barrels looking for swords he liked. What? Tashigi said, surprised. I have yet to meet one that couldn't be described as bad. Well, I have, Zoro said simply. One saved my life, actually. Tashigi was interested to hear what had happened. How did that happen? I was on an island far away from here. It was mostly just a small town with a large marine base. Zoro started his story. I had just started to eat at the local tavern when a man and his pet wolf busted through the door. He let the wolf loose on people who simply cowered as the wolf tore through the restaurant. Tashigi was astounded to hear this. Someone would dare do that with a marine base so close by. A little girl tried to stop the wolf from terrorizing the restaurant, but the man just laughed and had the wolf attack the girl. What happened to the girl? Tashigi asked. I killed the wolf before it could get her. But it turns out the man wasn't too pleased for me to do that. He should have expected it breaking the law like that. Did they call in the Marines then? Zoro laughed. Yes, they did, but not to arrest him. What do you mean? She asked. Well, turns out the man who owned the wolf was the son of the Marine captain in charge of the base. I don't remember the punk's name, something like Hippo or something, but Captain Morgan was the one in charge of the base. Tashigi was surprised to hear this. Captain Morgan was a name she recognized. He had been arrested for corruption, but this was an entirely new level of corrupt to her. So Hippo told me that he was going to bring down his father's wrath on the restaurant for killing his pet. But he offered me a deal. A deal? Tashigi asked. Yeah, 1 month strung to a cross without food or water. And in return, he wouldn't punish the girl. That's despicable. Using the Marines to do something so terrible, she said, angered. Yeah, well, I took the deal. I even made it a few weeks when out of nowhere this guy shows up. What guy? Well, his name was Monkey D. Luffy, I found out later. He's a pirate, in case you haven't heard of them. He's not just a pirate. He's one with a 50 million berry bounty on him. They say he's a real monster, she said, surprised. What was he doing there? I guess he was dropping off a kid that he saved from some pirates. The kid wanted to be a Marine but had been kidnapped by pirates, I guess. Oh, Tashigi said. That sounded like something the Marines should do. Yeah, but anyway, so this guy tells me that they're planning on executing me the next day. What? But what about the deal? Tashigi asked. She really didn't like the sound of the Marines that would abuse their power in such an evil way. Zoro laughed solemnly. I guess he never intended to honor that deal. But to make matters worse, the little girl got caught trying to feed me at one point. They tossed her over the wall when they caught her. But luckily Luffy caught her, so she wasn't hurt. Later, though, Morgan found out that they had let her go and ordered her to be executed. Zoro said that last part as he gripped one of the swords. He liked the feeling of this one. That monster, executing a little girl. Who would do such a thing? Zoro looked at Tashigi. A Marine captain, he said. This caused Tashigi to flinch a little bit. She had to admit this story damaged her pride as a Marine a little. But anyway, Luffy freed me when I found out that they were just going to execute me anyway. And in return, I helped him fight Captain Morgan. He was defeated, and the town was saved from that man. The Marines even let Luffy leave without trying to arrest him. He pulled the sword he had found from the barrel. Like I said, not all pirates are bad, but not all Marines are good either, he said, saying the last part looking right at her. I owe my life to a wanted pirate. Does that make me a bad person? Zoro finished. Tashigi shook her head no. She would have a lot to think about, she realized. A good pirate. The idea almost seemed funny in her mind, but after what she had heard. But then she noticed the sword in his hands. She leafed through her book until she found the right page. I thought so. Kaitsu 3. Its predecessor, the Kaitsu 2, is an Owazamano sword, and the Kaitsu I before that is listed as a top Owazamano sword. Zoro drew the sword looking at its blade. Mister, is this sword really 50,000 berries? Tashigi asked the salesman. Why yeah, incredible. It's a respectable Wazamano, you know. That one, you have to choose that one. Tashigi said. It normally goes for 1 million berries. You absolutely have to choose it. Over at the counter, the salesman was nervously sweating. And no, I can't sell it. The man shouted. Yeah, selling this for 50,000 berries is clearly strange. No, that's not what I mean. Zoro had felt the ill intent coming from the sword the moment he had touched it. A cursed sword? Huh, you knew. The salesman shouted in surprise. No, I can just tell, Zoro said simply, starting with the very first one. All the kaitsu have been superior swords, but every last one is cursed. The salesman said. Many famous master swordsmen have met tragic deaths after taking up kaitsu swords. These days, there ain't a single person who uses a kaitsu, because you'll leave this world even if you use them unknowingly. Even I want to get rid of that thing, but I'm afraid it'll curse me, the salesman said, looking scared. Kashigi looked to Zoro and bowed. I am sorry. I had no idea it was such a terrifying sword, she said, apologizing. I should have minded my own business. I like it. I'll take it, Zoro said, grinning. Are you a fool? I can't sell it, the salesman shouted. If you die because of it, then it'd be like I killed you myself. However, his rant was stopped when his wife hit him over the head. You're the fool. Just sell the stupid thing off. Then let's do this, Zoro said, looking at the sword. My luck, and this thing's curse. Let's see which one's stronger, he said as he calmly threw the sword in the air and held his arm out. You can't be serious, Kashigi shouted, watching the sword fly through the air. Stop. Its sharpness is the real deal. It'll take your whole arm off, the salesman shouted at him. Zoro just closed his eyes, accepting any outcome that would come from this, and the sword grazed his arm harmlessly with the back of the blade as it stuck itself in the ground, digging its way almost to the handle. Zoro just grinned. I'll take it. Everyone in the store was speechless. Kashigi and the salesman collapsed to the ground as they were shocked by the spectacle they had just witnessed. Zoro bent down and made to pull the sword from the ground. Hey, could you choose me another one? He looked to Kashigi. As sure, she stuttered out. Hold it. The salesman, having gathered his wits, shouted at the swordsman. He ran into the back of his shop as he went to retrieve something. Zoro attached the cursed sword to his hip as the salesman went into the back. Soon the salesman made his return with a wrapped bundle. Setting it on his counter, he revealed a sword. The make is black lacquer, and the blade's temper pattern uneven, he said as he drew it. The Ryo Wezamano Yubashiri, the man said. My shop may not be much, but this is the finest sword I have. I can't buy that, Zoro said. No way he could afford such a blade. I already told you, I got no money. Forget the money. And I don't need any for the kaitsu, either, the salesman said seriously. I'm sorry for trying to cheat you earlier. It's been a while since I've seen a good swordsman's eyes. They say the sword chooses the owner. I pray for your good fortune, the man said, smiling. Zoro thanked the man and left his shop. Having fastened his third blade to his belt like the rest of them, he began heading toward the harbor again. He was happy he hadn't ended up needing to use the money that Nami had given him. Now he wouldn't be in debt to her. Zoro was glad to have 3 swords again. It had been annoying to fight with borrowed swords back at Cocoyasi. Kashigi was still kneeling where she had fallen before. I was so frightened that I still can't stand up, she said, looking after the swordsman as he walked into the distance. She wished she had gotten the man's name now. Nejiko had convinced Sanji to make her lunch on the ship, so that's where they were headed. Nejiko had made her purchases, much to the excitement of Sanji. Soon they were back on the deck of the ship, and Sanji began unloading the crates of food he had purchased. Soon after, Sanji and Nejiko were enjoying a meal of their own on the ship, although both realized that being alone on the boat presented opportunities for other activities, and so Nejiko found herself dragging a giggling Sanji towards the men's quarters to show off her new purchases. Nami and Luffy now found themselves walking down the main street again. Nami had promised Luffy some food, so they began looking for a good restaurant. They soon found a good restaurant that had 2 flags flying out front. Sitting down, they looked over the menus and talked about their plans for traveling the next few days. Unknown to them, a group of gray-cloaked men walked in as well, finding a place to sit across the restaurant. Damn, that damn detestable straw hat, one could be overheard muttering. To think that we can't find him despite looking all over for him like this. But Captain, why in the hell do we have to wear cloaks like this? The other cloaked member asked. Don't you know anything about being a pirate? The other shouted at him. There's an annoying Navy captain named Smoker in this town. If he finds us, my plan to get revenge on that straw hat will be ruined. However, it was at this point that Buggy the clown saw his target. From across the restaurant, he saw that damn straw hat. The bastard was looking away from him, but he knew that hat. He began to laugh. All that hard searching for him, and he finally had him unaware. He pulled out 3 of his daggers and held them together between his fingers, creating a bladed fist. Detaching the hand, he lined up the shot. A woman from the other table pointed at the floating hand and screamed. He launched the hand forward, watching as the straw hat bastard turned toward the scream. Buggy smiled. This way he'd get to see the look on his face when he died. But he was surprised to see an orange-haired girl instead. Who the hell was she? Kaya and Yuzop were currently walking around town. Yuzop had found some shopping of his own to do, although Kaya had talked him down from buying a lot of junk from the toy shop. Although as they were shopping, Kaya spotted some goggles that she thought would fit Yuzop perfectly. After purchasing them, she stuck them in her bag so she could surprise Yuzop with them later. As they continued walking, they began to get hungry. It was then that Kaya and Yuzop noticed a strange purple-haired lion sitting outside a restaurant. They started to walk closer when suddenly smoke billowed out from the restaurant, followed by people screaming as they ran outside. Yuzop told Kaya to stay back while he ran towards the restaurant, intent to see what was going on. Luffy was currently holding the disembodied hand. He had seen it come flying at Nami, daggers prepared to stab her in the back. But he was faster. Buggy stood up to face his enemy. Moji quickly stood up as well, looking behind him to see the man they had been hunting down. Seeing the man before him and seeing the look in his eyes now made him remember why he didn't like his captain's obsession to kill him. Buggy felt his hand getting extremely cold as he shouted out in pain. What the hell was that bastard doing to his hand? Then he could suddenly no longer feel his hand as he watched that bastard shatter his hand. "Then my hand," Buggy said in surprise. He had always been immune to things like blades, so he thought he never had to worry about losing a limb. But he had never considering someone shattering his hand into 100 pieces. Luffy took the hat from Nami and put it back on his head. "Nami, how about you go find the others? I'll deal with Buggy," he said as his arms started to ooze magma. Smoke had begun billowing from his arms. Nami nodded at her captain and followed the waves of people rushing to get outside the restaurant. Luffy realized that this was probably the beginning of the end of their stay on Logtown. Smoker would probably track him down from here, and then it was only a matter of time before they had to leave the island. He was a little peeved that he had never made it to the execution platform, but Luffy guessed that would be alright since he had seen it once before. At this point, the restaurant had cleared out except for 3 men, although one looked like he very much wanted to leave. Luffy calmly walked over to the men. Smoke was filling the restaurant at this point as the magma poured faster from his arms. A helpful side effect of his powers, he realized, was that smoke didn't bother him as much as it would have before. However, the 2 men across from him were currently rubbing their eyes and coughing. How the hell were they going to face this guy if they couldn't even see properly? Luffy froze the magma in place with an ice coating and with a shout of Icy-Mag Fist, launched himself at the 2. Nami had run outside the restaurant and found Kaya standing nearby. She moved to her and caught her up on the situation. "Someone tried to stab you in the back," Kaya said, worried for her nakama. "Yeah, I don't know who it was though, both of the guys were wearing weird gray robes. Luffy's fighting them now." Yuzop had made it to one of the windows and tried to see what was going on inside. He put on his goggles so the smoke wouldn't hurt his eyes. Yuzop's eyes widened as he ducked as a fast-moving object was thrown over his head. He saw the gray object fly and hit the lion, sending both figures flying into the alley. However, another gray object came flying soon after the first one, tumbling across the ground as it came to a stop. After staying completely still for a few moments, Yuzop braved another look inside. He saw Luffy calmly walking towards the entrance. He realized it must have been his powers that was causing the smoke, but who was he fighting with? He looked back at the robed people that had been thrown through the window. Neither had moved since the incident, and the lion was definitely knocked out. As Luffy made it outside, he headed towards where he saw Kaya and Nami. On the way, he saw Yuzop catch up with him as they asked him what happened in there. "That was Buggy the clown. I guess he wanted revenge on me or something from beating him before," Luffy said, scratching his head. He had hoped that maybe considering last time he had shown that they were no match for him, this time they wouldn't try to fight him again. Apparently, he was wrong. However, there was one bit of luck. There weren't many Marines in the area yet, and the ones who were there were more concerned with trying to put out the fire in the restaurant than to figure out what had happened. Maybe he could still go see the execution platform. "Guys, we should probably get heading out here soon before the Marines get here. I still want to see the execution platform. Does anyone want to go?" Luffy asked his crew. Yuzop and Kaya said that they wanted to head back to the ship and would wait for them there. Nami, however, thought it would be better to make sure her captain didn't get lost and decided to travel with Luffy. So the 4 pirates split up and went their separate ways. A short while later, Smoker entered the area. Looking around, he could see his Marines seemed to have the situation handled. The smoke was cleared from the restaurant, and it was surprising to see very little damage had been done to the actual building. When his Marines questioned some of the civilians, they had said that some strange robed men had attacked another patron at the restaurant, one with a straw hat. Smoker realized that the pirate had already landed as he suspected. He had his men arrest the one robed figure they had found. The other had apparently escaped on a lion, as ridiculous as he thought that was. When his men pulled back the covering on the remaining man, Smoker realized who it was. Buggy the clown had apparently attacked Straw Hat. It looked like Buggy wanted revenge for his previous defeat. He told his men to get Seastone cuffs on him because of the devil fruit he was known to use. It looked like he might be bringing in a few high-value pirates today. Some of the people had seen the Straw Hat man leave with a woman in the direction of the town's main square, so that's where he began heading. On the way, he ran into Tashigi, who he had also been looking for. Tashigi had heard the commotion and had come just as he had. but he ordered her with him since the situation was already handled. We're heading after Monkey D. Luffy. He was spotted heading in this direction, Smoker said, looking at second in command. She nodded at this but said nothing. Monkey D. Luffy, she thought to herself. The man that was supposedly a good pirate that had saved that swordsman's life. She wasn't sure how she felt about this. For the first time in her career as a Marine, she almost hoped that they wouldn't find what they were looking for. Luffy and Nami soon found themselves at the town square. They could see towering above was the execution platform. As they got closer, they noticed a familiar face sleeping in front of the tower. Zoro currently was resting with his back to the tower. Earlier he had tried finding his way back to the ship but had gotten lost along the way. So eventually, he found a good spot to sleep for a little bit. Later he'd worry about trying to get back to the ship. That was until he felt something knocking on his skull. Yo Zoro. He heard the annoying call of his captain. Opening one eye he saw Luffy and Nami looking down on him. "All right, I'm up. What brings you guys here? I thought you were on a date or something." Nami annoyed hit him over the head. "We weren't on a date. Luffy wanted to see the execution platform, so that's why we're here." "What are you doing here? Is that what this is?" Zoro said, looking up at the platform. "Well, I got the swords as I wanted. And I didn't even need to use the money that you gave me, so here," Zoro said as he handed over the 100,000 that he had borrowed earlier. Nami took the money and counted it out. "All right, looks like you were honest. Now you only owe me another 100,000. Nami said, pocketing the cash. What? But I didn't even use it." Zoro shouted at her. "Yeah, but you agreed to a very modest 200% interest rate. And you're lucky it was only that." Nami shouted back. That's when it hit Zoro. He just had to talk to Luffy again. He had a way with talking to the devil woman, turning Luffy's way. He began saying, "Hey Luff," but then he realized he was gone. "Wait, where'd Luffy go?" Zoro asked, looking around. Nami, surprised as well, looked around before she realized where he must have gone. Looking up, her suspicions were confirmed. Luffy was currently looking out from the top of the execution platform. He had forgotten how amazing the view had been. "Hey, you over there." A call rang out from the courtyard. "Come down right away." A Marine could be seen shouting into a megaphone. Luffy laughed at the man. "Why?" he shouted back. "That's a special execution platform under control of the world government." The Marine shouted back. Nami and Zoro were currently looking up at their captain. Hopefully, he would come down soon. They didn't really want to bring down the Marine's attention on them. "Come down right now," the Marine shouted. "Well, you don't have to be so strict, officer," Luffy shouted back to the man. "If you don't come down, I'll just arrest you." "I'm coming up now," the Marine shouted back, annoyed at the kid. However, as he made to move to the platform, something smashed into him, knocking him out cold. The civilians shouted in surprise at the person who had just knocked a Marine out. "HMPH, now's not the time for small fries," the woman said. "I've been looking for you, Luffy. Long time no see." Alvida shouted up to her quarry. "Oh hey Alvida," Luffy shouted down, waving at her. The crowd, now getting a good look at the woman, began praising her beauty. "Who the hell is this lady?" Nami thought. "And how does she know Luffy? When your passionate fist hit me that time." "Oh, it felt good," Alvida said, flushing while putting a hand to her face. The crowd around her was struck at her beauty, completely speechless. "You guys, what's the most beautiful thing in the East Blue?" she asked the crowd, smiling. "That'd be you," the crowd shouted, all bending on one knee, gesturing in her direction. "That's right, it's me," she said, smiling wider. "No man in this world doesn't bow before my beauty," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "And I like strong men," she said, looking right at Luffy. Luffy was sweating a little bit at this point. He had kinda forgotten how she seemed to be obsessed with him. "I'll make you mine, Luffy," she said, smiling at him. "Who does this lady think she is?" Nami muttered, glaring at the woman. Zoro just laughed. "Oh, are you mad you have competition for our captain's affection?" he said, mocking Nami. "Shut up. She's no competition. I mean, I'm not competing," she shouted at Zoro. He just laughed again, but was quickly shut up when Nami threatened, "If you don't stop laughing now, I'll double your interest. And I'll keep increasing it till you'll be lucky if you can afford to feed yourself." Nami shouted at him. Zoro wisely shut up at this point and resumed listening to the strange woman. "I have to say, Luffy, I'm a little surprised you recognized me. After all, I did lose my freckles," Alvida said, gesturing at her face. "However, I notice I'm not the only one who's changed since last we met. You seem to have grown even more handsome. I also like the bared chest look. It is a great improvement, I must say," Alvida said, running her eyes up and down Luffy's body. Luffy wasn't really sure why, but he felt like he should be a little embarrassed at what she was saying. "All right, I've had enough of this." Nami was rolling up her sleeves, looking pissed off. Zoro was holding her back, though, keeping her from attacking the odd woman. At this point, a peal of thunder could be heard. Nami stopped what she was doing and looked to the sky. She cursed she hadn't been paying attention before, but now she could see that a massive storm was brewing. They were going to need to get out of here, and fast. "Luffy, let's get out of here before this storm really hits," Nami shouted to her captain. "Hey," Luffy said, looking up. Sure enough, he could see those same dark clouds forming. Luffy smiled, looking back down over the crowd that was currently watching him. He put one hand in the air and yelled, "I'm the man who will be king of the pirates." He shouted above the storm's howling winds and bouts of thunder. The crowd was stunned, all eyes were on Luffy. Alvida herself was surprised at the declaration but smiled. After all, she liked strong men, and the king of the pirates would have to be the strongest. However, the Marines had shown up just in time to hear the declaration. Smoker himself looked at the man and couldn't help but see Roger when he looked at him. "That kid," Smoker began, but he didn't finish the thought. This was going to be interesting, he realized. "Men, we can't let any of those pirates escape. Form a perimeter. Let the civilians pass but keep those pirates contained," Smoker shouted to his men. Marines began flooding from the connecting alleyways, forming a circle around the town's center. Civilians began dispersing as they were let past the Marines. Eventually, there were only 4 left standing in the center. Alvida was near the fountain while the other 3 pirates were at the execution platform. Tashigi, who was looking through her binoculars, was surprised to see the man she had seen earlier standing at the platform. That man, was he part of the Straw Hat Pirates? Then it hit her. The subordinates who had been knocked out at the base later said that they were attacked by Roronoa Zoro. Roronoa Zoro was now a pirate, who owed his life to Monkey D. Luffy, she realized. Luffy was surprised to see that it was only the 4 of them left in the center. It seems that since Buggy was out of commission, the rest of his men hadn't been gathered together. He jumped off the platform, landing next to Nami. He picked her up and held her in his arms. She shouted in surprise at this. "Time to go, guys," he said simply. Looking to Zoro, he asked, "Can you keep up?" Zoro merely laughed. And as his captain took off running, he followed close behind. As they passed Alvida, she followed after them. No way was she going to let her man escape her sight so easily. As they got closer to the Marines, they began to open fire. Alvida had no problem with this, as all of the bullets merely slid off of her, but Luffy had to dodge because of Nami. Zoro had drawn 2 of his blades and was deflecting the shots away from himself. Luffy and Zoro leaped over the line of surprised Marines as they tried firing at them in midair. Alvida merely slid through the Marines, most being too stunned at the beautiful woman to attack, and others who wanted to grab her failed to do so as their hands slipped. As Smoker watched the pirates get past his men, he ordered them to grab his bike. He wasn't going to get past him without a fight. Tashigi had apparently already left, as she was nowhere to be seen. The Straw Hats made their mad dash to the Going Merry as Marines could be seen chasing after them. Luffy still holding Nami as she clung to him desperately. Up ahead, a lone woman could be seen standing, sword drawn. They slowed as they approached the woman. Zoro noticed that it was Tashigi, the woman he had met earlier. "You're Roronoa Zoro," Tashigi said, looking at Zoro. "Yep," Zoro said simply, holding his 2 drawn swords to his side. "As a Marine, I can't let you pass," Tashigi said, sounding unsure of herself. "I know," Zoro said. He looked to the others and gave them a look telling all he needed to say. Luffy nodded and continued running along, Alvida following close behind. As they passed, the 2 swords met and began clashing over the sound of the storm. Although both realized the other wasn't putting their full heart into the fight. Eventually, Zoro got the upper hand, knocking the sword from her grip. As it clattered to the ground, Tashigi looked into Zoro's eyes. They were supposedly the eyes of a demon, but Tashigi had to disagree as she looked into them. The other Marines had shown up just in time to see their superior officer get disarmed. Tashigi nodded to Zoro in the direction of the harbor, and Zoro, getting the message, took off after his crew. Tashigi shouted after him, "Next time, Zoro. Next time you won't escape from me." Zoro laughed, taking one last look at the swordswoman. "I count on it," he said as he turned back running after his nakama. Tashigi smiled. Maybe all pirates weren't so evil after all. She picked up her sword and followed after Zoro. "Stop right there," Smoker said as the 3 pirates approached him. Luffy and Alvida stopped in their tracks as they saw Smoker standing in front of his bike, blocking their passage. Luffy set down Nami, and she stood next to him. "You can't enter the Grand Line unless you beat me first," Smoker said, glaring at Luffy. Luffy said to Nami, "Go on ahead, Nami, I'll meet you at the ship." Nami nodded as she ran to the side of the alley. Smoker ignored his eyes on Luffy. Luffy looked to Alvida. So what are you doing?" he asked. "Well, it seems I'm stuck here," she said. "Buggy's crew left this island after they saw their captain get arrested. The cowards took off and left me here." Luffy thought this over. "Well, I guess you can get a ride on my ship for now," Luffy said, trailing off. Alvida smiled at him and leaned over and gave him a kiss on the cheek. "Why, thank you, Luffy. See you there." She laughed as she ran on ahead. Luffy flushed a little bit. What was up with that lady, he thought to himself. Now it was just Luffy and Smoker standing alone in the street. They stared each other down, neither making a move. Luffy broke the silence as he said, "I'll beat you and enter the Grand Line." "Enough of this," Smoker said. He turned his fist into smoke as he launched it towards Luffy. Luffy jumped as it got closer, giving a spin kick while using armament haki to smash his foot into the fist that reformed once it was hit. Smoker retracted the hand, rubbing his injured hand. That bastard actually managed to hit him. This kid can use haki, he thought to himself. Smoker drew his Seastone jet. His smoke abilities might not be as useful in this fight, but his weapon sure would be. Luffy looked at the weapon and got an idea. A bit of Seastone would be useful to keep around. It was at this point Zoro caught up to his captain. He slowed down a bit when he saw Smoker but figured his captain had this handled as he ran past the two. Luffy didn't really want to continue this fight much more than he already had. Luffy launched an attack of his own, spewing lava from his fists towards Smoker. Smoker dodged the attack, launching himself into the air as Luffy's attack flew past him, hitting its real target and melting down his bike to a pile of molten slag. That bastard. He destroyed his motorcycle. Luffy laughed up at Smoker. See you on the Grand Line, he said cheekily as Luffy disappeared in a cold mist. Smoker swore, thinking he had lost the straw hat. He felt another wave of cold and was surprised as Luffy gave him another haki-infused punch, sending him into the nearby storefront. Dusting himself off, he was furious to learn that he was now disarmed as well. Looking outside, the straw hat was gone once again. Tashigi and the other Marines ran into Smoker as they ran towards the harbor. The Marines stopped when they saw their captain standing still. Tashigi asked, "Captain, where did they go?" "To the Grand Line." Smoker growled out. "That pirate, he was stronger than he looked. We're going after them. Ready a ship." Smoker ordered his men. "But, Captain, this island is in your jurisdiction. I don't know what the higher-ups would say." "Tell them I said, don't give me orders," Smoker said, staring the Marine down. "I'll come with you," Tashigi said, gripping her sword. She promised that man they'd fight again, and she intended to follow through on it. Unknown to the Marines, a man in a green robe was watching over them. Dragon was surprised at the strength his son had. He had come to see his son off for the Grand Line. He was surprised to see Luffy had actually gotten one over on Smoker. He smiled, looking in the direction his son had headed. He was a man now. He didn't need his help, it seemed. Nami had just gotten back to the Going Merry. Yuzop and Kaya had arrived a while ago after they split from the restaurant, and Nijiko and Sanji were still there as well. Nijiko could be seen holding a purple fruit smoothie as she greeted her sister. Nami started ordering the crew to get prepared to sail when an odd guest appeared on their ship. Alvida could be seen standing on the deck of their ship looking at the Straw Hats. "What are you doing here?" Nami shouted over the sound of the storm. "Your captain invited me aboard, of course. My heartless companions abandoned me to this island, and now I'm all alone," she said sarcastically, feigning real sadness. Most of the Straw Hats shrugged at this. It seemed like something their captain would do, inviting total strangers on their ship. Nami looked at the woman. "Fine, but we need to prepare to leave this island. You're going to help?" Alvida nodded and helped the crew prepare. Nijiko gave her drink to Sanji to protect it as she helped Nami. Zoro soon came aboard as well. Now they were only waiting on their captain. Although they didn't have to wait long, as Luffy appeared in a sudden flash of ice. A thin layer of ice covered a small portion of the deck where he had appeared clutching a strange weapon. Everyone was stunned at his appearance, but they soon got back to work. Pulling up the anchor, they unfurled the sails as they began to leave the harbor. Luffy sat on the figurehead laughing into the storm. This is where the real adventure begins, he thought to himself. And so the Straw Hats escaped the clutches of the Marines at Logtown and were ready to take on the Grand Line next. However, far away, people with immense power in this world turned their eyes to the small group. At Marineford, a meeting was taking place. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, Admiral Aokiji and Akainu, as well as Vice Admiral Garp, were currently sitting in an underground meeting room. Sengoku, looking towards Garp, began speaking. "We have been getting disturbing reports of a new pirate group in the East Blue." "Oh," Garp said. He had a feeling he knew what this was about, but outwardly he showed no change. "Yes, a pirate with the moniker Straw Hat Luffy has begun making some waves in East Blue. Although with his current heading it's likely his destination is the Grand Line." Garp nodded at this but said nothing more. There has to be some other reason for this meeting, or else the two admirals would not be here as well. However, even more disturbing is the boy's power. He has a devil fruit power that is very worrisome. "Really?" Garp said. He knew about his grandson's rubber powers but wasn't sure why they'd be so concerning. "Why are we really here, Sengoku? This meeting seems like a waste of time worrying about some low-life pirate. And why's Garp here? What's he got to do with this?" Akainu said as he leveled a glare at the Vice Admiral. "The reason I called the meeting with the three of you is that Straw Hat Luffy's full name is Monkey D. Luffy, Garp's grandson," Sengoku said, looking again to Garp. Aokiji and Akainu were surprised to hear this, looking to Garp. They hadn't even known he had a kid, let alone a grandson. "And the reason I called you two here is because this boy has displayed usage of both of your devil fruits." And all three were surprised to hear this, Garp especially. "Different devil fruit powers. Are you saying he controls both ice and magma?" Aokiji asked simply. "That's what the reports are saying. Right now I have a team watching Luffy's progress, and his strength is surprising," Sengoku said, passing some reports to the others. "It seems he's taken down a lot of pirate crews, and one corrupt marine," Aokiji said, looking towards Garp. I may have failed to make my grandson a Marine, but that doesn't mean I created a monster. He's a good kid even if he's a moron," Garp said, looking at one of the reports discussing his powers. Sengoku, looking seriously at Garp, said, "Did you know anything about the boy's powers?" "No, this is new to me," Garp said. What had happened to his old powers? "This pirate is dangerous," Akenu said. "We can't let him get out of East Blue." "I would normally agree with you," Aokiji replied. "However, considering the circumstances, I think it might be in our best interests to simply watch him for now." Sengoku, looking towards his two admirals, looked towards his old nakama. "And what do you think, Garp? Like I said, he may be a pirate, but he's still a good kid. I think considering what he's done so far, it seems he's doing our job better than the Marines in the area," Garp said. He really hadn't liked how this meeting had turned out. Akenu had all but said they should kill or imprison his grandson. "Why couldn't you have just been a Marine?" he thought to himself. Probably too much of his father in him. "I agree. I'll keep the tail on Luffy for the foreseeable future." "But Garp," Sengoku looked seriously at Garp, "if he becomes too much of a problem to handle, you know what must be done. For now, we have assigned him a bounty of 50 million berries. We can't be seen letting this pirate off easily." "I understand, Fleet Admiral," Garp said, looking down. "However, I will send out an order to stop anyone from attempting to bring him in. We have one Marine captain in pursuit of him currently. Captain Smoker ran into him in Logtown and has been pursuing him since. I think it would be wisest to have him keep an eye on him without interfering until further orders." "All right, this meeting is adjourned," Sengoku said, dismissing his admirals and Garp. Akenu didn't like the fact that they were letting the kid run around. However, he wasn't going to go against the Fleet Admiral. "Who the hell are you, Monkey D. Luffy?" he asked himself. The Going Merry and its crew were currently heading towards Reverse Mountain. Luffy was training by himself at the prow of the ship. He was using Zoro's weights that he had let him borrow in return for talking down his debt to Nami. Besides Rayleigh's training, he had never actually gone out of the way to train. He figured with a little extra strength would never hurt. Luffy wasn't paying attention to this, but he had somewhat of an audience. Alvida was currently unashamedly ogling the captain of the Straw Hats. She wasn't sure how or why, but the man in front of her looked a lot different than the one that had punched her off her ship all those months ago. But she didn't care why he changed. She was happy just enjoying the results. Luffy had foregone a shirt when he had decided to train with a little encouragement from herself. After all, he wouldn't want to get his vest sweaty, would he? She laughed to herself, sipping on a drink Sanji had provided as she watched Luffy's muscles ripple under the strain of his training. It would have been a real shame to get that shirt sweaty. Nami was currently glaring at Alvida. She didn't like how she had been eye-fucking her captain since day one on their ship. Although she had to admit, she had kept silent when she had told Luffy he should train without a shirt. She had been trying to read while enjoying the sun, but she found herself getting distracted. Nijiko was holding a purple fruit smoothie that Sanji had made special for her. She had to laugh at her sister antics. She had been on the same page for the past half hour and seemed to be making no progress. She spent a lot more time watching their captain and glaring at their guest than reading at the moment. Luffy decided that was enough training for the day. "Good work today, Captain." Alvida winked at him. He nodded at her, although he still didn't feel all that comfortable around her. She was always staring at him for some reason. She nodded to Nami and then Nijiko as he walked by. Nijiko took a long drink from her purple smoothie before she began coughing. "Sanji, this drink is disgusting," she shouted to the cook. She had drunk about half of it before the rank taste of the drink flooded her taste buds. "It must have been that fruit you gave me. Where did you get it anyway? Shouldn't eat strange fruit," Sanji called back to her. Luffy stopped in his tracks. Wait, he thought to himself. Purple, nasty tasting, strange fruit. It couldn't be. Luffy turned to Nijiko. "What strange fruit?" Nijiko crossed her arms and pouted. "Well, it might have been the one you kept in that chest under your bed. I thought it was weird you kept fruit in your room, but I thought it might taste good. So I asked Sanji to make it into a drink for me. If I had known it was disgusting, I never would have taken it." Luffy just stared at her. Nijiko, getting annoyed, asked what. Luffy shook his head and laughed. He continued walking by Nijiko. "What are you laughing for?" Nijiko called after him. "What was that fruit?" Luffy headed inside the men's quarters. He wiped off the sweat he had accumulated and then threw on his unbuttoned shirt. He began thinking back to his time with Shank, how he had eaten the fruit right out from Shank's nose without a clue what he was eating. He pulled out the chest from under his bed and sure enough it was empty. He tossed it back onto the bed and headed back outside. Nijiko was currently dumping the other half of the drink in the ocean. She handed the glass back to Sanji, who took it to clean it out. Seeing Luffy coming back, she asked him what was so funny earlier. "Why were you keeping that fruit?" "That was a devil fruit you ate." "You're a rubber girl now," Luffy said, chuckling. "What?" Nijiko asked, looking worried. "Here, watch this. Give me your hand," Luffy said to Nijiko. At this point, a lot of the crew was watching interestedly. Nijiko complied, and Luffy took her hand. Luffy then took off towards the other side of the ship. Nijiko, expecting to be dragged, was both surprised and terrified to see her arms stretch in front of her. It felt incredibly weird having her arm extend as Luffy pulled it behind him. The rest of the crew was surprised to see it as well, although Zoro was the only one to recognize the power for what it was. He had seen Luffy using this power when he had saved him from Captain Morgan. Luffy let go of her arm as it whipped back and returned to its standard size. Nijiko looked at her hand with a sense of wonder. Flexing her hand, she realized that while she still felt the same, everything had changed for her. "Well, cool," she said excitedly. She honestly had been worrying about how she would contribute to the crew, so this just made it easier for her. "Thanks for the devil fruit, Captain," she said, laughing as she went towards the kitchen. She was still thirsty, so she figured she could show off her new powers. At this point, Kaya remembered the devil fruit she had herself. Searching through her bag, she pulled it out. "So what do you think you're going to do with it?" Yuzop asked her. "I think I'm going to eat it. But I'll ask Luffy about it first since he seems to be more knowledgeable about devil fruits than any of us," Kaya said. Yuzop nodded at this. It made sense to him. So Kaya made her way over to the captain, who was currently looking over the side of the ship. "Luffy," Kaya said tentatively. Luffy, turning, saw Kaya. He was about to ask her what she needed before he noticed the fruit in her hands. "Whoa, is that a devil fruit?" Luffy asked, surprised. Yeah, I got it back at Logtown. I was hoping that you could help me decide what to do with it," Kaya asked. Luffy picked up the fruit and examined it. He had never seen a fruit like this before. A white and blue, pear-shaped devil fruit. He had no clue what it could possibly do. "Did the person who gave it to you tell you anything about it?" "Not really. They received it a long time ago. The only thing the doctor knew about it was that it would be useful for a doctor," Kaya said. Luffy said, handing the fruit back to Kaya. "Well, my opinion is, do whatever you think is best," he said, giving her a thumbs up and a smile. Then he headed to the figurehead so he could rest for a little while. Kaya just looked at her captain in surprise. No help there, she thought to herself. But she knew that she wanted desperately to be helpful to her companions. But what if this devil fruit didn't do anything useful? Looking to Yuzop, she steeled herself. She was going to have to risk it, she thought. So before Kaya could talk herself out of it, she took as big a bite out of the fruit as she could, wincing as she gagged at the bad taste. She swallowed the chunk of fruit, then began to eat the rest of it as well. Luffy, who noticed this, said to her, "You don't have to eat the whole thing, you know." Kaya quickly spits out the rest of the fruit into the ocean. "Why does it have to be so gross?" she asked. "Who knows?" Luffy said. "At least you don't have to eat all of it, though." He watched her to see if anything out of the ordinary happened. Kaya was thinking the same thing. Although after a while she realized that she didn't feel any different. What if it wasn't a devil fruit? She said. "Hey," Luffy began, "I've never seen another fruit look like that. That wasn't a devil fruit," Luffy said. "Though sometimes it can be hard to know what will happen. I wouldn't worry about it too much," Luffy said as he turned back to the figurehead and pulled himself on top. She looked to Yuzop, who merely shrugged. Yuzop told her he was going to go and make some more ammo for his slingshot, and Kaya decided to follow along. Alvida was currently sunbathing and had watched the events silently. 2 new devil fruit users on their ship. It seemed like sailing with this crew would defiantly be interesting. She looked at the only man who had ever bested her. She wondered what he was thinking about at this moment, but she had no way of knowing. So she just sat back and continued to rest, looking forward to whatever might come their way next. Nami was back to consulting their sea charts. It seemed like they had to head to Reverse Mountain and then ride a stream up to its peak. But that made no sense, water flowing up a mountain. How was that even possible? But they still had another couple of days before they were close, so she could ask Luffy about it before they got there. Sanji noticed Nijiko as she walked into the kitchen. He was surprised when she used her arm to wrap around him and pull him towards her. "What the hell?" he said, looking to Nijiko. She laughed. "Well, lover boy, looks like you fed me a devil fruit," she said. Right now she had one of her arms wrapped around Sanji, restraining him. "But boy, do these powers give me all sorts of fun ideas," she whispered the last part to Sanji. Sanji got over his surprise oddly quick. Blood began to dribble out his nose as he giggled perversely. He would look forward to whatever she had planned. Luffy was currently thinking on the figurehead. 2 new crew members, and both had devil fruit now. One he knew extensively and would be able to train her to use it more effectively. The other, well, he had no real clue what hers could do. Hopefully, it would be something useful to Kaya that would outweigh the cons of being a devil fruit user. And then they had their other guest on the ship, Alvida. He had never really gotten to know her all that well last time. The few times he had seen her, she seemed to want him for some reason that had never really been clear. He remembered back to her "I'll make you mine" comment and wondered what she had meant by that. Luffy realized that he was starting to feel those same weird feeling that he got in his gut sometimes when he was with Nami, only now they happened with Alvida as well. What did that mean? He had assumed that was because he might love Nami more than a Nakama, but why would he feel similar with Alvida? He didn't even know her all that well. He realized he also felt something odd when Alvida stared at him sometimes. He had thought it was creepy, but at the same time, it felt good, but a kind of good he wasn't used to. He was tempted to ask Nami, but she usually got embarrassed when he talked about it before, and she had said that love was something he was going to need to figure out for himself, so he decided just to let it be for now. He hoped that in time he would learn what all this meant to him. For now, he had to worry about the adventures that were yet to come. He smiled as he thought of Vivi. They would meet again soon and then they'd find Chopper. Then finally Robin, he thought with a smile. Eventually, Frankie and Brooke would be a part of his crew once again. That wouldn't be for a long time, however. He shook his head. No time to worry about that. First, he had to reunite with his nakama. He also had to make sure that he was strong enough to protect them. He thought about what Nami had said before, how that they all had to be strong so that he didn't always have to defend them. He knew that was true, but there were some monsters out there that he needed to be able to take down on his own. Haki training was going surprisingly well. He hadn't done it since Logtown yet, but so far his crew seemed to be picking up on it. It had taken him a long time before he had been able to even use it at will, let alone master it. He hoped that what they had learned so far would help in the fights to come. He thought about the changes that had occurred this time around. What would come of his increased bounty? Also, he was wondering about his crew. Only 2 members of his crew knew the truth about him, and they just knew the most important pieces. Should the rest of them know? What about the ones that had never come with them before? How would they take knowing that they had never come along, having traveled with them for the past few weeks? He found it surprising that he had sailed without them. Yuzop and Kaya got along great, he realized. Yuzop seemed to actually step up and be brave without anyone needing to force him to do so. It seemed he wanted to be strong for Kaya. Maybe he just wanted to be the hero in all of those stories he used to tell Kaya. Then there was Nichiko. Nichiko was a lot of fun to be around as well. She seemed to enjoy embarrassing her sister sometimes, which he thought was funny as well. She also seemed to have surprisingly enough gotten a handle on Sanji. He wasn't sure why, but Sanji no longer flew off the handle every time he saw a pretty lady. With the 4 girls on his ship now, he figured Sanji would have died at blood loss at this point, but he acted very politely when it came to the other girls. Was that because he was having sex with Nichiko, he wondered? He still didn't know what that was, but it was the only significant difference with Sanji he could think of. And also what was going to happen with Alvida. No matter what weird feelings she brought up in him, she was someone who had once been an enemy. He forgave a lot of people's pasts when they joined his crew. He didn't mind for the most part as long as he believed they were good people. But Alvida had kidnapped his nakama and held him hostage for years. No way Kobe was going to forgive something like that. Plus it was his goal to arrest her one day, and if she was on his crew. Shrugging, he decided that it was time to take a nap. Thinking about this stuff for too long strained his brain. He laid down on the sheep head and began to rest. Later that day Sanji called them all for dinner. Luffy, waking up from his spot, jumped down onto the deck of his ship. Rushing to the kitchen, he sat down at the table waiting for the others. Sanji finished setting the table while the others settled in. After everyone settled down and started to eat, the crew began conversing about what was to come. So how exactly do we actually get to the Grand Line? Nichiko asked her sister. Well, supposedly from what I've learned so far is that there are currents that take you straight up Reverse Mountain. Then there is one that brings you down, and you'll be deposited out on one end of the Grand Line. Nami said, Reverse Mountain is at the meeting point for all 4 seas. So all 4 currents meet at the top, then there is a 5th one that travels down to the Grand Line. Wait, you're saying that a river can actually go up a mountain? Zoro asked. Supposedly, but I guess we'll find out for ourselves, won't we? Nami said. Luffy laughed. Sounds like fun, eh? Some of the crew laughed at this. Leave it to their captain to be excited at the prospect of incredible danger. Is that where we're sailing now? Or is there another stop between here and there? Kaya asked. No, there are no islands on the way. Although from what I can tell there is supposed to be a small town at the base of Reverse Mountain. Nami said, looking at one of the charts she had purchased. After this, the crew started to finish their meal. Sanji began pulling plates to start washing dishes. Luffy, however, remembered about the 2 new devil fruits on his team. So Kaya, have you had any luck with your devil fruit yet? None so far. Is that a bad thing? Kaya asked nervously. Now sometimes the powers aren't something obvious. You would probably have felt something if it was a Loja by now. I can feel both the magma and ice sides of my powers deep within me. But Paramecia and Zoan types aren't always as obvious. Luffy told Kaya. Looking to Nichiko, he asked, are you getting a better hold of your powers so far? I've learned some interesting new moves, I guess, she said, sending a wink Sanji's way that causes him to have a small nosebleed. Oh really? Like what? Luffy asked, looking interested. Nami, having seen the suspicious look that her sister had, interrupted. We don't need to know. Sis, why do you have to spoil my fun? Nichiko joked, sticking her tongue out at her sister. And so their dinner continued. The Straw Hats joked with each other, and they enjoyed the meal Sanji had prepared for them. Luffy, however, was still annoyed that despite his best efforts he still couldn't eat the massive amounts of food as he once did. Luffy could be seen sitting in his favorite spot. He was currently watching the sunset dip below the horizon. Awfully romantic, isn't it? Turning around, Luffy saw Alvida looking at him. Well, I guess. Luffy didn't see the big deal. It was just the sun setting, something that happened every day. So Luffy, I figured if we're going to be together, we should get to know each other better, right? Alvida said suggestively. She had sauntered up to him and was currently rubbing his arm. Luffy shrugged her arm off though, and he thought it was weird that she was touching him. Look, Alvida, Luffy said seriously. I let you on my ship because I don't like leaving people to the mercy of the Marines. However, that doesn't make us nakama. Luffy looked at Alvida. Alvida was surprised. Not only had he rebuffed her advances, he pretty much just saved her because he felt responsible. "Why?" was all she could stutter out. "You kidnapped and abused a person I've come to see as a nakama. For all I know, you don't even remember him," Luffy said seriously. "What are you talking about?" she asked. What nakama of his had she done that to? Kobe, Luffy stated, looking straight into her eyes. Wait, are you talking about my old cabin boy? What's the point? He was a weakling. Not at all like you, Alvida said, confused. No, Kobe is strong. One day he's going to become a great Marine. And he promised me one day that he would arrest you. What, arrest me? Yes, Kobe's made it his goal to one day arrest you for what you put him through. And I won't stop a nakama from reaching his goal for someone who isn't one, Luffy said, looking back at the horizon as the last rays dipped below the water. When we get to the next major port town, we will part ways. We'll leave you with enough money and supplies to get you by for a while, but then you're on your own. Alvida, stunned, merely looked at Luffy's back. She turned and slowly made her way back to the cabins. As she entered, she found Nami listening in. She glanced at the girl before angrily brushing by her. Nami felt a little guilty listening in. Although it seemed Luffy had some pretty serious reasons for what he said, she couldn't help but feel bad for the woman. After all, if Luffy had said something like that to her, it would crush her. She walked outside. Luffy was still looking to the horizon, silently staring into the distance. If he noticed her, he didn't show it. She walked up to him and put a hand on his shoulder reassuringly. He stiffened at first, but noticing who it was, he relaxed. How are you doing, Luffy? At first, Luffy kept silent, but after a short moment of collecting his thoughts, he answered, I've never told someone I wanted them off my ship before. At least no one I've invited on in the first place. Nami continued, rubbing his shoulder affectionately. It's all right, Luffy. Luffy hopped off his perch. It was time to go to sleep. Nami pulled him into a tight hug, surprising him. He hugged her back as she rested her head on his shoulder. Luffy knew that he would do anything to protect her. Holding her tight, he knew that he wasn't going to let anyone tear his crew from him again. But why did hugging her feel so good to him? He enjoyed being close to her. Was this love? They both pulled away, and they headed back towards the cabin. Luffy and Nami said goodnight as they went to their separate sleeping arrangements. Luffy pulled himself into his bed and looked at the wooden ceiling of the ship. Love was a mystery feeling. Nami was having similar thoughts in the woman's quarters next door. Why did she feel this way for her captain? It was apparent that Luffy had no relationship with her in his past. She felt like Luffy wouldn't be so oblivious if they had. So why did she think this way if the other her didn't? Although she had to admit, her feelings would be a lot more confusing if he had a previous relationship with her. She hoped that one day Luffy would figure out his feelings. She only wished that when that happened, she knew herself what her feelings were. The next day was to be their last in East Blue. The crew enjoyed smooth sailing as they relaxed in each other's company. However, one was noticeably absent. Alvida hadn't felt like being with the rest of the Straw Hats. Currently, she was by herself looking off the railing of the stern of the ship. She was presently reflecting on her life. Growing up, one thing had been evident to her. The strong were meant to rule, and the strong could do what they wanted. She hadn't had the most comfortable time growing up. She knew all along that she was once someone who people saw as incredibly ugly. She had never had the looks most men desired. People had always treated her poorly from a young age. Other girls always made fun of her. Both to her face and behind her back they laughed at her, and men weren't any better. But she had shown them. She had grown strong on her own. No one dared laugh at Iron Mace Alvida. It didn't matter what you looked like when you could crush any who spoke out against you. After she had become a pirate, she had never had people comment negatively on her looks. Her crew regularly called her beautiful, although they knew that if they didn't, she would have cracked their skulls with the heavy mace that had earned her the epithet Iron Mace. She was strong, and she had gotten used to taking what she wanted. She thought she had the beauty that people had always made fun of her for lacking. She had all the money she could have wanted and had the power to get more if she wanted. That was until that fateful day. The day she met the man who had been the only one with the strength to knock her down. After that, she had found the sub no mai, which had given her the beauty she had always craved. She no longer had to threaten people into calling her beautiful. People who had no clue who she was had no problem declaring her the most beautiful woman in the world. She thought she had found a man that was actually worth her attention. After all, a man as powerful as Luffy was inevitably going to have it all one day, and he had declared to all that he was going to be the next pirate king. It only made sense he had a strong, beautiful woman like her. Alvida had been surprised that he wanted nothing to do with her. The only reason she was where she was now and not God knows where else was because he had taken pity on her. Because despite being a powerful man, he was also an incredibly kind one, she had come to realize. Seeing him with his crew, she realized that none sailed with him because he was the strongest. He had affected them each in their own lives and made them want to travel with him because they each had their dreams and goals to follow, and because they wanted to help Luffy accomplish his own. She had never had a dream beyond being beautiful. But if beauty and strength didn't always get you what you wanted, then what was the point? Alvida began to realize that even with all the beauty that she had always wanted, she is still ugly on the inside. And Luffy saw that, because of the way she had treated people. People like Colby, someone so weak she had never really even needed to threaten him. Kobe had always done what she wanted because he had seen her anger against the others. But Luffy had been the man actually to make Kobe stand up for himself. He had called her ugly before Luffy had defeated her. She realized that maybe she was still appalling to him. The rest of the crew, unaware of the plight of their guest, went about their day. The day drawled on, and eventually, the Straw Hats found themselves gathering for dinner. Although Alvida never joined them despite their attempts to get her to come to dinner, Luffy couldn't help but feel guilty for that. He had only said what he meant, but he still felt terrible about it. That didn't change his mind though. As far as he knew, she was still a pretty lousy person. Not Arlong or Don Krieg bad maybe, but she wasn't above hurting innocent people. Nami gave a sideways glance to Luffy a few times through the meal but didn't say anything about how he was unusually quiet. After she finished eating, she excused herself as she left the rest of her crew. She began looking around the ship for Alvida, and soon she found the woman at the stern of the boat. Alvida, noticing her unexpected guest, asked, "What are you doing here?" "I'm sorry that I listened in last night." Alvida showed little surprise to her apology. "Oh, I didn't expect an apology. Look, you feel bad about what Luffy said, don't you?" "What's it to you?" Alvida said with a small frown showing. "Well, I don't know why I'm saying this, but if you feel bad and want to keep sailing with us, then you'll just have to show Luffy that you can change," Nami said seriously. She wasn't sure why she was consoling the older woman, but she felt like it was the right thing to do. "What if I don't want to change?" Alvida said, looking back at Nami. "Then don't," Nami replied. Alvida turned back to face the ocean again, watching the wake of the ship fade into the distance. She didn't reply, and Nami left her alone. Nami left Alvida to her thoughts and went back to the woman's quarters. Laying on her cot, she looked up at the ceiling. Tomorrow was the day that they would reach Reverse Mountain, and it would be their last time in East Blue for a very long time. She would miss her home, but she was excited to see where they would go next. Growing up under Arlong's rule had been terrible. She had never felt more alone than the moment that old tattoo was placed on her arm. But now she had new nakama, a new crew. Surprisingly enough, she had become a pirate, something she had always thought she hated. But Luffy had shown her how great a pirate could be. It wasn't about being a fearsome crew of bloodthirsty monsters like she had always thought. It was about the freedom and the nakama you made along the way. When Nijiko had decided to come along, it had surprised Nami, but she joined them. Nami would have seriously missed her sister had she left Nijiko back at Cocoyasi. Added to the fact that they had their small grove of tangerines to tend on the going merry, made it seem like sometimes their mother was still watching out for them. She was happy and free, and she owed it all to one man. Yuzop and Kaya were currently on the deck watching the waves lap against their ship. They were both thrilled to be where they were. Yuzop was sailing off to be a great warrior of the sea just like his father had. And because of the woman next to him, he felt like every day he was a step closer to that goal. At first, he had been worried when Kaya had said she wanted to go. After all, she had never left her house really when he had first gotten to know her. Kaya had always seemed so frail, although now he could see that even though she was the same Kaya that she was back in Syrup Village, she was also so much more. Kaya helped him to realize what being brave really meant. Growing up, he had always thought that bravery was never having any fear, facing whatever daunting challenges came your way with a smile. But that wasn't what bravery was. He still got scared when he was faced with danger, but Kaya had helped him to find the strength to face his fears even though he wanted to run. He had slowly begun to realize that real bravery was to fight back even when you're scared out of your mind. Turning to Kaya, he thought about how much he cared about her. If she had never come, he would have missed her terribly, he realized. He then thought about his dad and his mother. He wondered how his dad felt when he had chosen to leave behind the woman he loved and his only son. Kaya, seeing Yuzop looking at her, smiled, and Yuzop smiled back. She was glad to come along with Yuzop on what was sure to be his greatest adventure. Now it would be their adventure, Kaya realized. She could only hope, however, that whatever devil fruit ability she had gotten would help her to protect Yuzop and the rest of the crew. She then thought about how she had come to decide to go along. how Kuro had pretended to be her butler and was basically family for 3 years, only to try and kill her for her inheritance. But when it came time to enact his plan, when he had attacked Yuzop and her new nakama, she had decided to pull the trigger on that pistol and end Kuro instead. That decision was something that used to weigh heavily on her mind. Kaya had killed someone, but she had come to realize that while she would do anything to avoid being put in the same situation again, she still thought that her decision was the right thing to do. She only hoped, however, that now instead of fighting to protect her nakama, she could now keep them from harm's way and heal them when she could. Gathering some courage, she stood up on her toes and gave Yuzop a quick kiss on the cheek and said her goodnight. She then headed back to the woman's quarters with a blush quickly spreading across her face. Yuzop was stunned, although with a grin he got over that quickly, and he headed back to the men's quarters himself. Soon the Straw Hats and their guest found themselves staring up at the massive mountain in front of them. They had finally arrived at Reverse Mountain. They were amazed to see that the current did indeed shoot straight up the face of the mountain. Archways decorated the steep climb up the mountain. They then realized that they were picking up some serious speed and were heading straight for the entrance. Everyone grabbed hold of something, Luffy shouted, while the rest grabbed hold of anything they could. And the crew soon found themselves rocketing up Reverse Mountain. They could only watch as the arches passed overhead at incredible speeds. Everyone was holding steady, gripping the railings for dear life. And soon they were at the top, sailing through the air for a short while before the ship crashed down and was launched back down the mountain. The crew was silent, all save Luffy, who was currently laughing excitedly. The rest were tense as they waited for the intense ride to be over, and hopefully not, because the ship gets crashed against the rocks. As they rode the current down the mountain, they noticed an intense fog seemed to block their view of the base of the mountain. However, a strange giant mass could be seen poking through the mist. Then the Straw Hats began to hear a deafeningly low bellow. The Straw Hats, as they sped down the mountain, began to panic. The fog had cleared at this point, and they could see the giant object for what it was. It was a giant whale, and the scariest part was the fact that its giant maw was currently open, facing the exit of the downstream. Likely it was fishing in the laziest fashion possible, collecting all the fish that accidentally got themselves caught in the current that took them from their home sea to the whale's awaiting stomach. The whale didn't even seem to be aware of the boat that was currently sailing straight into its mouth. Luffy began to laugh. His crew, however, was still panicking. Some had tried to steer the ship away from the giant whale, but to no avail, as the current kept them on their course. Soon enough they found themselves sailing straight past the whale's teeth and into the belly of the beast. Darkness overtook them all as the whale shut its mouth. Laboon had fed enough this time and was now going to continue its fight against the impassable mountain. He submerged himself and began swimming away from the mountain, preparing to use himself as a battering ram. The Straw Hats, much to the surprise of the crew minus their captain, were still alive. They found themselves on a strange greenish sea with the bright blue sky and clouds overhead. Further ahead they could see a small island with a cottage on it. "Are we dreaming?" Kaya asked, dumbfounded. "Or are we dead?" Zoro replied. "Weren't we just swallowed by a whale?" Nami asked. "Then we are dead," Zoro said. But before they could give much more thought to their surroundings, a giant squid rose from the green sea. It looked down on the small boat as it readied itself to smash the ship to pieces. But Luffy, looking up at the giant creature, gave it a look that made it realize that it wasn't the top predator here. It almost began to run away when suddenly 3 harpoons flew from the now open doorway of the cottage, impaling the poor squid. The squid collapsed backward, revealing the 3 rope lines leading to the cottage, where an old man walked outside to see the pirate ship. He stared at the boat for a few seconds, then began to draw his catch in. "Wait, was he fishing, or did he try and save us?" Yuzop asked. No one answered, and soon they found themselves having a tense standoff with the strange old man. However, it came to an end when the old man sat down in a lawn chair and began lazily reading a newspaper. "Say something," Sanji yelled at the stranger. The old man just looked over his newspaper at the pirates. This continued for an uncomfortable amount of time. "Hey old man, would you mind just telling us just who you are, and just where this place is?" Zoro asked the old man, pulling a fuming Sanji away. "It's common courtesy to introduce yourself before asking others questions, you know," the old man replied. "Oh right, sorry about that," Zoro said back. But as Zoro opened his mouth to answer the man's question, the guy interrupting answered Zoro's question. "My name is Crocus, the lighthouse keeper of Twin Capes. I'm 71 years old, a Gemini, and type Ab blood." Zoro, getting pissed off, attempted to draw his sword as Sanji tried to pull him back. "Nobody minds if I kill him, right?" Zoro shouted back. "You're wondering where this place is? You first trespass in my private resort and then start mouthing off with that attitude." Crocus shouted at the Straw Hats. "Does this place look like the stomach of a mouse?" That's when the reality sunk in with the Straw Hats. "We really did sail straight into a whale's mouth then," Alvida said, speaking up. Nami was surprisingly not all that worried. Luffy seemed happy enough, so she hoped that meant nothing serious was going on. If it's an exit you want, it's right over there, Crocus said, pointing at a massive doorway on what appeared to be the horizon. Why is there an exit inside a whale's stomach? Sanji said in surprise. That's when they noticed that the sky was nothing more than a painting. Why did you paint the inside of a whale's stomach? Zoro asked Crocus. That's just my way of having a good time, Crocus said, turning back to his newspaper. But then their entire small world was shaken as a resounding boom echoed through the whale's stomach. This sent waves in the stomach acid as the ship and the supposed island crashed up and down on the acid waves. So he started again, has he? Crocus said, standing up. When the Straw Hats saw the island bobbing up and down, they realized that it was actually a ship with an iron hull. That's when they realized that their ship was currently sitting in a writhing sea of acid. Hey, what's going on here? Yuzop shouted to Crocus. Crocus, turning to the Straw Hats, stated, this whale has started bashing his head against the red line again. Luffy looked down grimly. He remembered the pain that Laboon was going through, losing his nakama. The other crew members began remembering the intense scarring that was on the whale's forehead. That whale is suffering, Nami said sadly. Then the old man did something completely unexpected. He dove into the green sea and swam towards the exit. The Straw Hats, realizing that this might be their time to leave, began to row the ship towards the massive door. As they neared the door, they noticed two people step outside of the smaller door on the small platform. Not seeing the old man who was currently in the sea, they saw the little ship that was sailing their way. Looking at each other, they took aim at the walls of the massive whale's stomach. Luffy, noticing Vivi and Mr. Wednesday's appearance, disappeared off the deck of the Going Merry, leaving any icy vapor in his place. The other crew were surprised but turned back to the duo. They knew what their captain was likely up to. However, the two who had come with the plan to kill the whale were surprised to see a man appear from thin air in front of them. They weren't given any time to react, however, as Luffy swiftly smacked their heads together. He felt a little bad hurting Vivi, but she was trying to kill Laboon. Crocus had just started to climb the ladder at this point and was surprised to see the kid beat him to those brats who kept trying to kill Laboon. But he was grateful that the boy had helped save Laboon. He continued his climb up the ladder and walked past the three. He had to subdue Laboon before he really hurt himself again. While Crocus was attending to Laboon, Luffy waited for his ship to pull closer. When they did, he jumped down on deck with the two unconscious intruders under his arms. They tied them up, not knowing what else to do with them. However, soon Crocus came back, and he hopped on their ship, telling them to go back to his island. Crocus began to explain how Laboon was an island whale and why the two people were trying to kill Laboon. Their goal is to hunt Laboon because the meat from Laboon can feed their town for 2 to 3 years. Crocus said, but I won't allow that. He then explained how Laboon had been following a group of pirates that he had seen as his pod members, and how those pirates had been forced to leave him behind because the Grand Line was likely to be too dangerous for a baby whale. Then he told them about the promise the pirates had made to return back for Laboon. But then he dropped the bombshell. It's been over 50 years since then. Luffy felt for the poor whale. He knew that halfway across the world right now Brook was sailing aimlessly all alone, and how much he wanted to come back and see Laboon. He thought to himself how in his old future Brook would never be making his return trip to finally reunite with his old nakama. He promised himself that Laboon was going to see his nakama again one day. Luffy and the Straw Hats were currently talking with Crocus at his lighthouse. The Straw Hats had learned the full sad story of Laboon, about how he was waiting for nakama that were never going to show. But Luffy knew different. He would bring Brook back here one day. He had failed to do so before, but that wouldn't happen again. After a little deliberation, the Straw Hats had decided to let their 2 prisoners go. They jumped overboard, and the Straw Hats watched as the strange pair swam away. Luffy was watching Vivi go and thought about how weird it was to see Vivi act this way again when Luffy had seen her as the kind princess she was. Luffy didn't like the fact that she had tried to kill Laboon, but he supposed that he had a hard time faulting her when Vivi was faced with the situation back home. Laboon was starting to stir from his drug-induced slumber now. Luffy watched as the giant whale opened its eyes again. It looked at the mountain before it and just stared at its enemy. Luffy decided to speak to the whale. Hey Laboon, he shouted. Luffy watched as the one visible eye turned in his direction. I promise to bring back whatever nakama you have left. I will return one day. I promise you that. Laboon stared at the strange pirate. The whale then surprisingly began to tear up a little. Luffy painted his Jolly Roger as a sign of his promise. Crocus let out a rare smile as he looked at the pirate. There was a kindness to him that was rare in most people. Laboon let out a small wail at that in agreement. So don't you bash your head against the wall and make it disappear. By the time we come back, you hear. Luffy shouted at Laboon. Laboon let out a louder wail in agreement this time. Good, Luffy shouted back. The crew was already preparing to sail off to their next destination now. Nami was starting to chart out their next goal, and Yuzop was trying to make small repairs to the Going Merry. Kaya talked to Crocus about becoming a doctor. Crocus was happy to give her the medical texts he had collected over his many years. After all, it had been years since Crocus had needed to read any of them. He had long ago memorized the contents of his many books. Luffy then pulled out of his pocket that log pose he had taken from Mr. Nine. He gave it to Nami as he told her it would help to get to their next destination. He explained the log pose as best he could. So it will point to the next destination as long as we've stayed a long enough time at the current island, which varies from island to island, right? Nami said, surprised. That's basically it, Luffy confirmed. Crocus talked to the Straw Hat Navigator, going into more detail the specifics of the log pose. Nami was astounded to hear of this. She strapped the strange device to her wrist as she watched it point in the direction of the next island. Looking at her compass, she confirmed that it would indeed be of no use here on the Grand Line. It sounded like the Grand Line was a dangerous place, but she knew that if she were to accomplish her dream and Luffy's, that it was the only way to do so. However, it was at this point that Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday returned. They told their story on how they needed to reach Whiskey Peak and about their lost ship. Unfortunately, their main reasons for asking for help from the pirates that they had lost their weapons as well. Otherwise, they would have taken back the log pose and the pirate's ship by force. They were currently bowing before Nami. Crocus told the Straw Hats not to trust them, but Luffy disagreed. Okay, you can come along if you want, Luffy said to the groveling duo. They stopped bowing to Nami and switched to Luffy bowing at his feet, thanking him for his kindness. The Straw Hats boarded their ship as they prepared to set off. They said their goodbyes to Crocus, who tried one last time to dissuade them from sailing to Whiskey Peak with the ruffian. But Luffy was adamant. He wanted to go this way. Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday currently were laughing behind the captain's back at his foolishness. And as the Straw Hats sailed away, Laboon gave a loud wail towards his newest nakama, saying his goodbye. Luffy, laughing, shouted to the whale, "Bye. We're going now, Laboon." Laboon let out a loud bellow and watched as the Straw Hats left. Crocus just watched as the crew set sail. He could only hope that Luffy hadn't promised too much to the whale. He wasn't sure what would happen if they never came back. And that promise of his to bring back Laboon's nakama, that would surely come back to bite him. Although he thought to himself that if anyone could follow through on that promise, he felt like it could be that crew. The journey to Whiskey Peak was not an easy one. They faced a variety of different weathers and storms on their way. Nami had learned just what it meant to sail on this sea, unable to trust really anything other than the log pose. However, the Straw Hats had managed to make it. In the distance, they could see great cactuses raising into the sky, towering above the small bits of land. The Going Merry had a rough time so far on the Grand Line, but it had pulled through in the end, due mostly to Yuzop's many repairs that he had done on their journey. The ship pulled closer and closer to the island. The visibility was significantly reduced, however, since a thick fog was currently blanketing the island. "So this is Whiskey Peak?" Zoro asked, looking at the island. "Guess so," Luffy responded. "Seems like it should have been named after cactuses, considering what this island looks like," Alvida said, looking at the towering plants. "Well then, we'll be leaving now." Turning, the Straw Hats were surprised to see Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday standing on the railing of the ship. "Thanks for taking us home, honeys," Miss Wednesday told the Straw Hats. "If we're linked by fate, we'll meet again." Mr. Nine followed up with, "Bye-bye, baby." The strange pair shouted in unison as they leaped off the ship. They then began swimming towards the island. "Huh," Yuzop said. "Who on earth were they?" "Who cares?" Alvida said. The other Straw Hats seemed to agree with this sentiment as they watched as they pulled into the river that bisected the island. The river was surprisingly wide for such a small island. It was almost more like two different islands than one land mass. They couldn't see the shore all that well because of the fog, but hopefully, there was a town upriver that they could stock up at. Their stocks from Logtown were only about half what they were before, so it would be good to restock. However, the crew began noticing people standing on the shores. The Straw Hats put their hands on their weapons. It looked ominous the way they were being stared at, so they wanted to be ready for anything. Then the fog began to lift as massive crowds of people were revealed. The crowds were cheering for the pirates and looked like they had prepared a party for the incoming pirates. Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro were all standing on one side of the ship. Along the coast was a massive crowd of women shouting to the three. They're looking this way. They're so handsome," the women shouted and waved to the three men. "Whoa, there are lots of cute girls here," Sanji shouted excitedly, leaning over the railing. However, his excitement was short-lived when suddenly he found himself being dragged away by his ear. "What the hell?" But Sanji didn't finish his statement, seeing who was dragging him. Nijiko had a look that spoke of untold pain to come. Sanji wisely decided to shut up and go willingly with Nijiko. Luffy was standing there waving to the women. He too found himself dragged away by Nami. "Nami, what are you doing?" Luffy asked, confused. "TSCH, like I'm going to let those slags anywhere near you," Nami said under her breath. This left Zoro the only one to appreciate the women's catcalls. He, however, was uninterested and decided it was time to sleep. Laying down on the deck, he quickly dozed off, much to the crowd's annoyance. Nami, what's going on? Luffy asked again, not getting an answer the first time. Nami began, but she wasn't sure she wanted to explain. Look, Luffy, Sanji made me a dessert earlier that I didn't want. Do you? Nami said as she held the dessert out. Luffy was successfully distracted from whatever his previous questions had been as he quickly began devouring the dessert. Thanks a lot, Nami, Luffy said, wrapping his other arm around his navigator as he ate from the plate in Nami's hand. Nami began to turn a little red. She wasn't sure how it had turned to this, but she wasn't going to complain. Don't worry about it, Luffy. It's my pleasure. She finished, turning to a full-out blush. Luffy, noticing Nami's face was a bright red, grew concerned for his navigator. Hey Nami, are you sick? He asked. He realized both his hands were full, so he put his forehead to hers to try and check her temperature. Nami began to splutter unintelligibly at this. She wasn't sure how to respond. Her captain had his arm around her, and his face was so close. She found herself wondering what it would be like to kiss him. When Kaya interrupted, Nami's sick, she asked worriedly. Luffy pulled his face away from Nami as Kaya headed their way. Looks like it, Luffy said. Her face is all red, and she feels hot. Nami, a mix of embarrassment and anger, tried to explain herself. I'm not sick. I just got too much sun is all. Oh, is that all? Luffy said as his worry lessened. Here, this should help, Luffy said, putting his straw hat on her head. Nami pulled the hat more snugly on her head. Thanks, Luffy, she said. No problem, Luffy said as he continued to eat the food Nami had given him. Kaya realized that maybe she had interrupted something she shouldn't have, so she walked back to where Yuzop was watching the crowd that was cheering on the pirates. Although Kaya, Yuzop, and Alvida seemed to be the only one interested in greeting the crowd, as the rest of the crew was busy elsewhere. Alvida could be seen at the prow of the ship basking in the crowd's praise. Calls of "so beautiful" were heard from the crowds on either side of the ship. Young and old, women and men were all stunned at the woman's beauty, and they made sure she knew it. Mijiko and Sanji were currently nowhere to be found on deck. Zoro was asleep. Luffy was happily munching on food as Nami stuck close by his side. However, they were soon directed to a dock where they could tie off their ship. As the crew gathered to around the railing of the ship, Sanji and Mijiko emerged from the women's quarters. They joined the others that were looking down at the crowd. Zoro was still asleep, but the others were looking at the group with interest. Sanji was particularly disheveled looking. His tie was loose, and his suit had a few tears in the seams. His hair was a wild mess, and there were even flecks of dried blood on the front of his shirt. He was also missing one of his shoes. Despite his appearance, his face was plastered with a perverted grin that refused to go away. Mijiko, however, looked as she usually did, not a hair out of place. She was currently smiling, and it had an oddly proud air about it. Welk, one of the townspeople, began, but then he started to cough. Welcome, my name is Igarappoi. I'm the mayor of Whiskey Peak. The man introduced himself. Okay, I'm Luffy. Nice to meet you. Whiskey Peak is a town that thrives on making liquor and music. Igarappoi continued. Zoro opened his eyes at that. Liquor, he thought to himself. He joined the rest of his crew on deck and began to listen to the strange-looking man. Hospitality is the pride of our town. As for our fine liquor, it's as bountiful as the seawater. At this point, the Straw Hats decided to come ashore. The town seemed to have a genuine like for pirates. Would you allow us to throw a party for you so that we may hear your tales? And again Igarappoi coughed. Your tales of adventure. He finished. We'll be glad to. Luffy, Sanji, and Yuzop shouted in unison. Zoro and Nami were holding back, looking at their nakama. The idiot trio. Nami said simply. Now, everyone, prepare for the party. Sing to entertain the adventurers. Igarappoi shouted to the people of his village, and the villagers cheered as they prepared to set up a party. Later that night the party was going strong. People were drinking and eating in excess, and laughing at their heart's content. Yuzop was telling tales of his and Kaya's adventures as people listened in. Kaya merely listened, fascinated by how he could spin a story. Alvida was currently basking in the attention that many men and women were giving her for her beauty. She thought to herself that eating that devil fruit was likely the second best thing that's ever happened to her. Nami, who was still wearing Luffy's hat, had dragged both Luffy and Zoro into a drinking contest. Luffy hadn't been that hard to convince, but she had threatened Zoro with his debt to make sure he participated. Although he had wanted to drink in the first place, he didn't want to be told to drink. Mijiko joined, not wishing to be outdone by her sister, and Sanji joined in as well to be with Mijiko. Nami and Mijiko were tied as they drank their 12th cup. Luffy was still going strong at 11 drinks, and Zoro had stopped on his 10th drink and went to sleep. Sanji had gotten a little loopy after the 9th drink and had fallen asleep, nuzzling Mijiko's breasts in his perverted sleep. Igarappoi laughed as he saw the Straw Hats enjoying themselves. What a festive night this is. Your enjoyment means the world to us. Later that night the party was still going strong. Nami and Anun were the only two left in the drinking contest, both being tied at 15 drinks. Luffy had stopped drinking after 14 and Nijiko had passed out at 13. She and Sanji were currently curled up on one of the couches together sleeping off the booze, although finally as she attempted to drink her 16th drink, the nun passed out. Nami after draining her last passed out as well. At this point, all the Straw Hats were seemingly asleep, and Baroque Works members started to gather. Luffy and Zoro, however, were both awake ready to take on whatever this village was planning on throwing at them. Nami was awake as well, but that was only because she didn't trust the villagers. Outside, Igarappoi or Mr. 8 was currently meeting with Mr. 9 and Miss Wednesday. Miss Wednesday asked, "Have you taken care of those pirates? They're falling. Straight to hell, that is," Mr. 8 responded. At this point, Miss Monday left the bar and regrouped with the others. She took off her nun disguise as she asked, "Is there really even a need to stage this whole welcome party in the first place? I mean, they're only a bunch of weak-looking brats. Now I've done my homework about this crew," Mr. 8 said as he dug around in his jacket for the new bounties they had acquired. He pulled them out to reveal 2 bounties. One was of Luffy with his 50 million berry bounty, and the other was of Zoro, who due to his previous reputation and his new association with the Straw Hats had gotten himself an 8 million berry bounty. The other 3 were stunned to see this. That crew, between only 2 of its members, had nearly a 60 million bounty. Maybe they were more dangerous than they had first thought, especially the captain who makes up most of the bounty. Plus Roronoa Zoro was a name they had all heard even from the Grand Line, which is impressive for a bounty hunter in East Blue. They had never heard the name Monkey D. Luffy before. They wondered what he could have done to have gotten such a high bounty in the East Blue. To judge a pirate's strength from his appearance alone is quite foolish, Miss Monday, Mr. 8 said. Miss Monday apologized for her assumption. "Now go confiscate any money or treasures on their ship and tie them all up," Mr. 8 demanded. Suddenly a laugh was heard from overhead. The 4 Baroque members looked for the source before they were surprised to see the 2 pirates that they had just been discussing standing on the roof of the bar. "If you think we're scary, wait till Nami hears that you were messing with her treasure." Luffy laughed down to the surprised group. "Ch, I wouldn't even mess with that devil woman when money's involved," Zoro said seriously. "So why don't you let our crew sleep for a bit longer? They're all tired from the journey over here." At this point, a few members of the village burst out from the bar. "Mr. 8, Miss Monday, 2 of their crew has escaped. Weren't you 2 passed out cold after all that drinking just a moment ago?" Mr. 8 said, annoyed. Luffy laughed again. "We both quit early. We didn't trust you lot, so we figured we'd only drink a little bit. So that's what this place is then. This place is a den of bounty hunters, and you take advantage of the overconfident newbie pirates who've just entered the Grand Line." Zoro smirked. "I get the feeling that with only 100 of you this won't be much of a match with the 2 of us." "Baroque Works," Zoro said, looking down at the group of bounty hunters that had formed. "Say, Captain, why don't you sit this one out? Make it a bit more fair for the small fry here," Zoro said as he put his sword into his mouth. Luffy, laughing, said, "All right if you're sure." Zoro nodded before jumping down to meet the bounty hunters. The bounty hunters below gasped in surprise. "How do you know the name of our organization?" Mr. 9 shouted in surprise. "Back when I was in the same line of business as you, a certain organization tried to scout me, but I refused, of course," Zoro said around his Wado Ikemanji. "Wait, really, Zoro? That's so cool," Luffy shouted in surprise. Then he laughed and grinned down at the Baroque agents below. "Now he's one of my nakama and first mate." Mr. 8 grimaced at this. "If they know our secret, we have no choice but to eliminate them," he started to say. Then he pointed his subordinates at the duo with a shout of "Kill them." Zoro smirked around his sword. This was going to be fun. Eventually Zoro was standing amongst the defeated millions. "Man, that wasn't much of a workout. Your organization isn't as tough as it makes itself out to be," Zoro said. The 4 remaining number agents grimaced as they looked at the man that had taken down over 100 of their men. They were surprised to see 2 more people step onto the field, though, much to the 4 agents' terror. "Are you idiots just playing around?" one started to say. 100 agents down, and they were all brought down by 1 man. The other figure laughed. "Give them a break. You can't expect them to be as capable as we are." Mr. 5, Miss Valentine, the 4 agents shouted in surprise. Mr. 9 started to speak. "With you 2 backing us up, those pirates stand no chance." Mr. 5 grimaced at that. "Stop joking around," he said, glaring at Mr. 9. "You think we're your backups? You honestly believe that we'd be ordered to come all the way out here at the edge of the Grand Line just to help you fight off some pirates?" At that, Mr. 5 began to laugh. "Then what business have you come here for?" Mr. 9 said, confused. "Surely you must have some hunches. A crime severe enough that the boss would personally dispatch us all the way out here." The boss' direct words were, "My secret has been found out. Of course, we have no idea what that secret may be, but..." At this, Luffy raised his hand. "Oh, I do," he said excitedly. Mr. 5 looked up at the annoyance. "What are you blathering on about? I know your boss's secret," Luffy shouted. The 6 agents gave a start at that. Miss Wednesday was surprised to hear that. Was it the Straw Hat who they were after? She was almost sure her cover was blown, but maybe. TSOCH. Like a nobody like you would actually know anything about the boss secret, Mr. Five said, smirking. Miss Monday followed up with one of our agents is from a certain kingdom and they have infiltrated Baroque Works. Yeah, but your boss is Crocodile. Who really cares? It's not really that big a deal, Luffy said, crossing his arms. He was annoyed that the agents had just blown him off like that. All 6 agents gave another start at that. 4 hadn't even known his identity, but Mr. 8 and Miss Wednesday did. They thought to themselves, how does he know Crocodile? Well, it looks like we'll have more than just a couple to kill today. If that's true, of course, Mr. 5 said. That knowledge was very dangerous. If Mr. Zero found out that they all knew his identity, they would all be killed without hesitation. How the hell had this kid know that? No one below Miss All Sunday ever met with the boss face to face. How does a nobody like you know that? Miss Valentine said, glaring at the pirate. Luffy continued to pout. Well, I might have told you before, but you guys are mean. No way am I going to tell you now. Zoro's sweat dropped at this. He wasn't surprised that Luffy knew considering his past. But why did he have to act like such a kid? It's no matter, Mr. 5 said. We will just have to kill you all now. Hopefully, the boss never has to learn that the 2 of us have that knowledge. That should be possible if all of you are dead. Especially you two, Vivi and Igaram. At this, Mr. 5 began digging in his nose for ammunition while Miss Valentine launched herself in the air. Mr. 8, otherwise known as Igaram, pulled on his drawstrings to reveal his secret weapon hidden in his hair. He sent a volley at Mr. 5 as Miss Monday and Mr. 9 were unable to move due to their shock. Miss Wednesday began spinning her peacock slashers and watched as Miss Valentine floated above them. Mr. 5 was revealed to be entirely unharmed of the explosions that had happened all around him due to Igaram. Miss Valentine, however, was beginning her descent, rapidly flying straight at Vivi as she laughed. Mr. 9, not knowing entirely what was going on, decided that he would protect his partner. He pulled out his metal batons and ran straight at Mr. 5. Mr. 5 just smirked as he pulled 2 boogers from his nose. Nose fancy. Cannon, he shouted as he launched the boogers at Mr. 9 and Igaram. They exploded with a tremendous amount of force, knocking Igaram to the ground and sending Mr. 9 flying through the air. Miss Wednesday had been too close to Igaram as she also was launched into one of the nearby buildings. Vivi was staring in shock as her nakama were defeated in a single blow. She was temporarily too stunned to pay attention to the woman that was currently gaining mass as she fell towards the unsuspecting Vivi. However, Luffy, who just watched in the beginning, decided it was time to interfere. He started to use his ice powers and with a shout of icy launch, created a pillar of ice that launched him off the roof towards Miss Valentine. Miss Valentine, much to her surprise, was given a strong punch that was a lot harder than she ever thought a pirate like him would have been capable. She was sent straight towards the other island and crashed hard. Much to Mr. 5's surprise, she didn't get up. Just how hard can that kid punch? He thought to himself. Mr. 5 launched another one of his nose cannons at Luffy, who saw this coming due to his observation haki and vanished into an icy vapor, causing the explosion to blow up harmlessly behind him. Luffy then reformed a few feet away, grinning at Mr. 5, who looked at him in shock. He must have a devil fruit, but just what kind? Mr. 5 thought. Vivi, stunned at the power that she had just seen from the young pirate, asked, "Just who are you?" "Future king of the pirates," Luffy shouted with a grin. Vivi simply stared at that declaration. She thought it sounded foolish, but considering it was looking like he was the strongest one here, maybe he wasn't all that foolish. Zoro walked over and stood next to his captain and Vivi. Igaram had begun to regain consciousness at this point and crawled towards the 2 straw hats. "Please allow me to make an unreasonable request," Igaram begged at their feet. "It is beyond my power to stop him. Please protect the princess in my stead." Princess, Zoro thought to himself. Just who are these people? Luffy, however, smiled and said, "Okay, I'll protect you too." And he turned, raising his fists, prepared to fight the remaining Baroque member. Vivi resumed spinning her weapons and Zoro drew all 3 of his swords. Mr. 5 looked at the 3 in his way. One had defeated his partner in the blink of an eye. The other he was unsure of, but was likely strong as well, seeing as he defeated all the underlings. Then there was Vivi and Igaram. It looked like Igaram was on death's door already, but Vivi hadn't been touched. This wasn't looking good for him. Unknown to the people on the ground below, high up above, the 2 unluckies had been watching the fight. Looking at each other, they decided it was time to report what they had seen. They flew off into the distance, leaving the rest of their organization's members behind. The boss wasn't going to be happy, that was for sure. Mr. 5 decided that there was no way he could defeat all of them. And with his partner Mia, it was even less likely. "We will meet again, pirates, and you too," he said, pointing at Vivi and Igaram. "Your days are numbered," he said, and took off running. Hopefully, he would be able to find his partner, but if she fell in the water. At this point, Luffy's crew had started to come around. Noticing the lack of villagers, they began to file outside. Nami had been watching from the window of the bar but followed the rest of them out. When she met up with Luffy, she gave him back his hat, and he nodded appreciatively. "So, what party did we miss?" Alvida asked, looking at all the unconscious villagers. "Well, it was a trap, but we stopped them," Zoro said bluntly. Luffy nodded at this, and that was when the crew noticed the two others in their midst. "Hey, you're that girl from before. Miss Wednesday, right?" Yuzop said. "Well, it's a little more complicated than that," Vivi said, looking to Igaram. "Miss Wednesday is just her codename for the organization we were spying on," Igaram began to say. "Baroque Works is an organization that is attempting to take over our home country. Miss Wednesday is actually Princess Vivi," Igaram revealed to the Straw Hats. "Wait, you're a princess?" Nami asked. The potential payday for rescuing a princess. Berry signs took over in her mind as she turned to them. "You know, if you guys need escorting, we could be convinced to help. For a very meager fee, of course." "No," Luffy said. "What?" Nami shouted in surprise. "If your island is on the way," Luffy began, "we will take you there." Igaram bowed deeply to Luffy. "Thank you so much, sir. I owe you more than I ever could repay you if you get her there safely." Igaram stood up again. "I have a plan, though, that can help you get off this island. Your log post should have already set by now, so it will direct you to the next island. However, I have another one that points directly to Alabasta." "Well, why don't we just use that one then?" Nami asked. If she wasn't going to be making money on this trip, then at least it could be quick. "Because I believe that when we leave this island, we will be attacked. It's only a matter of time before someone reports in, and they send someone after us. However, if I take the log pose and head towards Alabasta with a disguise, I can act as a decoy. If anyone will get attacked, it will be me that way," Igaram said solemnly. "Igaram, you can't," Vivi began to say. "No, princess. It's the least I can do," Igaram replied. "I will leave now with the decoys." Igaram continued. "You and your crew should wait till the morning to give me a few hours head start. Then you will head on the more traditional route to get to Alabasta. I can't say how long it will take, but I wish you all a safe journey, and please bring the princess back safely." Luffy nodded at this, and then after Vivi said her goodbyes to Igaram, they returned to the Going Merry. They watched as Igaram boarded his own ship and then set off down the canal. "Are we sure this plan is going to work out?" Yuzop asked. "After all, what if we were being watched? What if they see through our plan from the get-go?" "Well, too late to worry about that now," Luffy said, smiling to Yuzop. "That's not the reaction you should have," Yuzop thought to himself. The Straw Hats made their plans as they got to know their newest crew member. In a few hours' time, they would leave the island with Igaram acting as a decoy. When morning broke, they set off down the river. Soon they were almost on the open ocean again as they began to sail the next island. However, they were surprised when an extra guest spoke up on their ship. "Be careful not to crash your ship into the rocks near the shore." A voice surprised the crew of the Going Merry. "And congratulations on your escape." "Wha? And who's that?" were shouted in surprise as the crew looked up to see a woman sitting on their ship's upper deck. Luffy looked up to see Robin, the future archaeologist of the Straw Hats. "What a nice ship this is," she said nonchalantly. "I must tell you, Miss Wednesday, I met up with Mr. 8 just a while ago." The woman said. What are you saying?" Vivi asked nervously. "And what are you doing all the way out here, Miss All Sunday?" "Whose partner is she?" Nami exclaimed. "She's Mr. Zero's partner," Vivi said. "She's the only one who knows the boss' true identity, which is why Igaram and I tailed her." "Well, technically, it was more like I let you tail after me," Robin said condescendingly. "I already knew that," Vivi shouted. "What exactly is your objective?" No need to get so worked up. I only let you follow me because you looked so desperate," Robin said. "I doubt that," Luffy said. Robin looked to the Straw Hat Pirate. "Monkey D. Luffy is what his bounty said. Such a large bounty for such an odd-looking pirate. Maybe there was more to him than meets the eye." "Oh, and what makes you say that?" she asked the man. "I don't know. That reason just seems dumb to me," Luffy replied. "I get the feeling you don't like your boss all that much, or you wouldn't be here talking to us, and you wouldn't have let Igaram live." If Robin was surprised at his observation, she didn't show it. "Maybe I just like to play with my prey before I kill them," she said morbidly. "Now you don't seem that mean to me," Luffy said back. "Igaram's still alive," Vivi shouted. "Yeah, I could still sense him. Igaram's a bit too far away now, but I could before we met her. He's still headed towards Alabasta, it seems like," Luffy said to Vivi. He was admittedly lying a little bit. His observational haki didn't go that far, but hopefully he could get Robin to confirm it. "Is it true?" Vivi asked Miss All Sunday. "Is Igaram still alive?" Robin sighed. "Yes, I felt no reason to kill him, so he still lives." She then withdrew an eternal log pose from her clothes and tossed it to Luffy. How had this kid sensed Igaram? There was definitely more to this man than appearances let on. "That will take you straight to an island right before Alabasta. It's a route that Baroque doesn't know about, so you won't be followed either." "Why would she give something like that to us?" Vivi said surprised. "And no, if you're trying to convince me you're an enemy, you're doing a bad job of it. But then Luffy crushed the log pose much to everyone's surprise. Luffy, why would you do that? Nami shouted. We will take our own path to get there. I won't have it chosen for us. Luffy replied, looking right at Robin. Oh really now? How interesting, Robin said with a hint of a smile. This pirate was turning out to be quite fascinating. Why do you feel the need to protect the princess? Her country can't afford to pay you, and up to a few hours ago you didn't even know who she was. So why would you go so far as to escort her all the way back to her country? Robin asked Luffy. She was genuinely curious at this point. Such selflessness was rare to the point of non-existence. It was the right thing to do, and it sounded like it'd be a lot of fun. Plus it looks like I'll be able to kick a warlord's ass if I get to Alabasta, so that's a good enough reason right there. Luffy said, grinning. Really? You're going to fight Crocodile? You know he is powerful. Do you really think you have the strength to fight someone like him? She asked seriously. There wasn't a lot she knew about Luffy other than his bounty and some of the pirates he had defeated thus far. But beyond that, he was an unknown entity. So the fact that he was confident enough that he could take down a warlord was intriguing. And this was the second man she had ever met with the middle initial of D. That in itself was interesting as well. If you think someone like a warlord is strong enough to take me on, well, I guess you'll just have to see for yourself, won't you? Luffy smirked. Oh, well, I know. But what if I decided that you are too dangerous to let go? I could sink your ship right now, and that would stop you from getting to Alabasta, wouldn't it? Miss All Sunday smirked back. This man was terribly bold to make such claims. Yeah, you could. But where's the fun in that? I think you'd have a lot more fun seeing me kick your boss ass. Luffy laughed. Robin found herself smiling to her surprise. That did sound awfully interesting. Well, it's been a pleasure, Straw Hat Luffy, but I must go. I should probably warn my boss that you're planning on taking him down, don't you think? Well, you could always travel with us, Luffy said. What? Vivi shouted in surprise. Yeah, what's going on, Luffy? She works for the big bad guy, the one who's trying to kill us. Nami shouted as well. Yeah, she does work for him, but she doesn't really seem to be all that loyal to him, Luffy said to his crew. I'm a good judge of character. Trust me, Luffy said, looking at Nami. Nami opened her mouth to reply but then shut it again. Luffy, even though he was a moron at times, had been right in the past when it came to people. Plus he was from the future, so he hopefully knew what he was doing. All right, Luffy, if that's your decision. It's all right with me then. Zoro stared the woman down for a while. He didn't trust her as his captain did, but with a shrug of his shoulders, he decided to let the issue drop. It was his job to follow his captain anyway. The rest of his crew seemed uneasy at this, but they nodded as well. Vivi, however, was not so convinced. How can you say that? This woman is second in command of the entire organization that is trying to take over my country. We can't trust her. Vivi, do you trust me to get you home? Luffy asked seriously. Vivi stopped talking and looked at the man in front of her. She had to admit she had underestimated him the first time they had met, but she had seen a little of his strength so far, and it had impressed her. Right now he was radiating confidence that he knew what he was doing. Finally, with a sigh, she said, Yes, Luffy, I do. All right, then trust I know what I'm doing then, Luffy said. Vivi, looking at Luffy, eventually nodded in acceptance. She didn't really have any choice in the matter anyway. If he wanted to take her along, then she would have to accept it. All right, so what do you say, Miss All Sunday? Want to go on an adventure? Luffy said, grinning up at his past and future Nakama. Robin sighed, looking down at the man. She had to admit there was a small part of her that wanted to say yes. However, it was not to be, she decided. Whatever this man said likely couldn't be backed up anyway. How many times had she given herself hope only to either be used or betrayed since she was young? No, whatever this man had to offer, it would be no different in the end. After all, he may have a high bounty for someone who just came from the East Blue, but he was still no match for Crocodile. She would also need protection from the world government, and this man would certainly never be able to do that. More likely to abandon her as soon as he figured out who she really was. The 79 million berries bounty would likely be enough to drive him away. What gives you the impression that I would willingly betray a warlord who has only just begun his journey on the Grand Line? Robin asked seriously. Because unlike Crocodile, I won't betray you the second you outlive your usefulness, Luffy said, looking her right in the eye. Not only that, but I know of your bounty. The fact that they gave a small child such a high bounty for the pursuit of knowledge is disgusting. You feel the need to protect yourself by hiding behind a man like Crocodile, but you should never have to hide behind anyone. You could stand next to us as Nakama and never have to hide from anyone, Luffy said, surprisingly most of his crew and more importantly Robin with his knowledge. Robin looked at Luffy again with a hard look in her eye. Just how much does this pirate know? You say that, but you have yet to feel the full wrath of the world government on your back. If you were to accept me into your crew, they would have their eye on you every step of your journey, Robin said, scowling at him. She was prepared for him to cave just as she suspected he would. The world government can burn for all I care, and the celestial dragons, while they're at it, they will be after me whether you sail with me or not. They pretend to stand for justice and protecting the innocent, yet are the direct cause of a lot of suffering in this world," Luffy said, getting angry thinking about the dragons. Robin was shocked to hear his vehement disapproval. Most pirates didn't care for much that didn't extend off their own ship, at least as long as it didn't include a potential payout in the end. "You say the world government will be after you, but you don't realize how small a fish you are in this sea. So far you don't matter much to anyone other than the clerk who filed away your bounty. Some nameless marine might see you as potential career advancement, but if you think anyone worthwhile has their eye on you, you're delusional," Robin said angrily. This conversation wasn't going the way she had planned it. She had planned on getting a rise out of them and moving on her way. But now it seemed she had a bone to pick with this captain who seemed to be suffering from an overinflated ego just because he might have been a big player in the East Blue. "Maybe you're right. Maybe the government doesn't have its eye on me right now. I can promise you, however, they will come to regret that mistake, because I have my eye on them. If I find somewhere that innocent people are being harmed or taken advantage of, then I will be there to put things right," Luffy said with conviction. "The world government has operated too long under the thumb of the Celestials, who act as if they are gods. Slavery, murder, and anything else they can get away with because they are descended from royalty. I can guarantee you the world government may not have made me its enemy, but they are mine." At this, a lot of the crew exchanged nervous glances. Just what exactly was going on here? The strange woman had snuck onto their ship, and now she and their captain were having a very intense debate. "Besides, they most certainly know my name if for one fact alone. I am the son of Monkey D. Dragon," Luffy said finally. He was putting a lot on the line right now, all in the hope Robin would join him early. He didn't want her to suffer any more than she already had. More importantly, he could never be sure that something different could happen to result in Robin's death. What if Crocodile decided early that she was a liability? He could never live with himself if she left here and never got to see each other ever again. "So you say that having you with us would make the world government come down on us. But do you think that the knowledge you have really compares to being the son of the most wanted man in the entire world?" Luffy asked her, watching for her reaction. The Straw Hat crew couldn't help but exchange surprised glances at that declaration. Almost everyone had heard the name Dragon at least once. The leader of the revolutionary army that was trying to bring down the world government. That was a name most couldn't say aloud for fear of bringing the attention of the government on you. Robin stared at the man in open-mouthed shock. Monkey D. Dragon. If that was true, then this young man was most certainly someone the government would be after. She was surprised to hear that he didn't have a much higher bounty. "So Robin, you have a choice. Do you work for a man who will use and betray you as he sees fit? Or will take a chance and sail with us as Nakama and fight for your dream?" Luffy watching Robin's face carefully. This was the moment of truth after all. Her choice would affect many things going forward either way. Was this crew worth it? Robin thought. She had long been past trusting anyone like this, or so she thought. There was something in her heart that screamed for her to just take one more chance. Something that said she deserved what this crew offered her. "Why do you want me to join so badly?" Robin asked, betraying the emotional turmoil beneath her calm exterior. Luffy smiled at her. "Because you look like someone who could use Nakama." Robin stared at him. That part of her that cried out for this kind of companionship caved at this declaration. She calmly collected herself as she gave her answer. "All right, Captain." Luffy grinned and gave her a thumbs up. "All right, guys, let's set off." "Wait," Robin said as she walked over to the railing of the Going Merry. "Lunchai, go back to Alabasta. I will be meeting you there." The giant turtle nodded and, turning away, began to swim towards the far-off destination. "Whoa, a giant turtle," Yuzop said, looking out at the turtle as it swam away. "All right, Captain, I'm ready now," Robin said. "All right," he shouted to everyone, "we are setting off now." Robin looked around at all the pirates currently staring at her. She didn't recognize many other than the princess herself and their captain. "My captain, it seems that you have some interesting Nakama," Robin said, smiling at Luffy. "Yup, after all you're here, aren't you?" Luffy laughed. Robin laughed in return as well. "Nakama, already. I think it will take a while before we consider each other Nakama. How about you just call me Robin for now?" "Nico Robin," Luffy smiled in return. "Okay, Robin." He knew that one day they would be Nakama again. He was surprised he had actually convinced Robin to come with him already. He knew that with her past that she had been lonely for a long time. Hopefully, now Luffy and the Straw Hats could make her feel at home for the first time in a long time for her. He was looking forward to being her Nakama again. So the Straw Hats set sail, heading off to their next destination, the island known as Little Garden. Far away, a meeting was happening between Crocodile and his subordinates with a transponder snail. "Where are we with the situation regarding Miss Wednesday and Mr. 8? Crocodile asked his officer agents. "It seems Mr. 5 and Mrs. Valentine lost them. Mr. 5 retreated after his partner was defeated by some pirates." "Interesting. I recently got some reports from the Unluckies and Miss All Sunday." "Mr. 3, I want you to go out and eliminate Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine. They have learned too much, and considering their defeat they are now a liability." Report back when the job is done. Crocodile ordered into the transponder snail. Yes, sir, as you command. Mr. 3 replied. Sir, what should we do about the Straw Hat Pirates? Mr. 1 asked his boss. Nothing for now. I currently have the Unluckies tracking their progress. Also, Miss All Sunday seems to have gone rogue. If anyone sees her, they are to report to me. Mr. 0 replied. Everyone else, your orders remain the same. If anything changes, I expect an immediate report. Yes, sir. The members of Baroque Works replied. And Mr. 0 cut the connection with all of his subordinates. Nico Robin's recent actions had him concerned. He had worked too hard for his plans to go to waste now. He looked outside the window of his office as he watched the Crocs swim by, contemplating his second-in-command's actions. The newest guests on the Going Merry were getting themselves situated. Vivi had taken the same cot she had when she had been traveling with them as Miss Wednesday, and Robin picked one out for herself. Vivi had been keeping a close eye on Robin since she had gotten on the ship. Now that she was alone with her, she was determined to get some answers. Why did you decide to come with us? Vivi asked Robin. She had a hard time trusting this woman. After all, she had been one of the people in charge of destabilizing her country, but she could only hope that Luffy knew what he was doing. After all, the fate of her country was now on his shoulders. To be honest, I find myself asking myself the same question, Robin said as she packed away her belongings. I suppose the easiest answer is I have nothing to lose. If you guys succeed, then my current employer is no longer a problem for me, and should you lose, well, then my situation is as precarious as it always was. Robin smiled at Vivi. Vivi frowned at this but didn't respond. To herself, she thought, now I really hope Luffy knows what he's doing. However, Robin interrupted the princess's thoughts as she said, I did not work for Crocodile, because I wanted to harm your country, if that makes you feel better. Vivi nodded and said, well, that doesn't change the fact that you did help him. Why did you aid Crocodile if it wasn't to hurt my country? Robin sighed. This was why she mainly worked alone. No one to explain your actions to if no one was close to you. Those reasons, well, they are extremely personal. It's not something I wish to go into. I hope you can understand that. Vivi thought about it and finally nodded. All right then. I guess I won't push you, but no, I will have my eye on you. Just because Luffy trusts you doesn't mean I do, or anyone else here for that matter. Robin smiled. That is just fine with me, princess. I don't trust any of you either. Robin continued setting up her cot as she turned away from Vivi. Vivi watched her for a moment before returning to her belongings. Only time would tell if trusting this woman would come to bite them later on. Nezuko and Luffy could be seen talking on the deck of the ship. He had started to explain some of the techniques he knew for using the gum fruit. She was still working on the whipping action that it took to get a strong punch going. How do you know so much about the gum fruit? Nezuko asked Luffy. Well, it was given to me by an old friend. He told me about it and some cool moves. But I ended up eating a different devil fruit, Luffy replied. Nezuko nodded at this, and the two continued working at it. Eventually, she managed to keep her fist flying straight after a lot of mishaps with misplaced punches. Keep it up, Nezuko. You're getting good at this. Soon enough your punches will be strong as a pistol, Luffy said, laughing. All right, Captain, I'm not a little kid, you know, Nezuko said, shaking her head. However, she was grateful for his help. Once she got a little better control over her powers, she hoped that she would be able to help the crew more. So Luffy, anything I should know about regarding you and my sister? Nezuko asked, continuing to practice her punching. What do you mean? Luffy asked with a confused expression on his face. Nezuko studied his face for a while before finally cracking a smile and shaking her head in disbelief. Guess that answers that, she muttered to herself. It seemed their captain was really too dense to see anything between him and Nami. All right then, Luffy responded. He watched her train for a little while, but then he left her and went to his favorite spot on Mary's figurehead. It was a bit odd, he had to admit, seeing someone else use his devil fruit. There were times where he certainly missed it, but this was for the best. Yawning, he laid back on the figurehead and decided to take a nap. Later that day, Luffy's stomach started to growl. It wasn't close to dinner, and they'd already had lunch earlier. Smirking to himself, he decided it was time to raid the kitchen. Most of his crew was milling around on deck, including Sanji, who was swooning over Nezuko. He headed inside the kitchen and saw Robin enjoying a cup of tea. Robin, noticing the Luffy sneaking about, raised an eyebrow at his actions but said nothing. Don't tell Sanji I was here, Luffy said as he headed towards the pantry. Robin nodded as she continued sipping at her tea. Luffy got himself some food and sat across from Robin. The two sat in silence together as they ate and drank respectively. So Luffy, Robin broke the silence. Why did you invite me on your ship? Luffy stopped eating and thought of a way to answer that. Well, why did you accept? He replied. I don't really know myself, to be honest. I've sailed with a lot of people in the past, but never in one group for too long, she said. Crocodile isn't someone I've enjoyed working with, but then again I have never enjoyed working with anyone. So, I suppose for now you're just my next adventure. Though if what you say is true, maybe this will be a long-term arrangement. I don't suppose I need to tell you that Crocodile is a dangerous enemy to make. If I feel like you can't back up your words from yesterday, well, I will leave and never look back, you can be sure of that," Robin said, smirking at Luffy. All right then. I can promise you though that Crocodile will be no issue for me," Luffy said, nodding. "Well," Robin said expectantly. Luffy just cocked his head at her, confused. "What? I answered your question, now you answer mine, right?" "Oh yeah. Wait, what was your question again?" Luffy asked. Robin looked at him and let out a drawn-out sigh. "Never mind. Another time perhaps." Luffy nodded at this. Finishing his snack, he disposed of his utensils in the sink and with a quick goodbye left Robin to her thoughts. What an odd man, she thought to herself as she finished her tea. Kaya and Yuzop were currently on deck talking. "Have you figured anything out yet about your devil fruit?" Yuzop asked. "No, not yet. Do you think that's bad? What if I got a totally useless power?" Kaya asked Yuzop worriedly. Hey, it's all right," Yuzop said, wrapping his arm around Kaya. "I'm sure it's not useless. It might just take a while to figure everything out," Yuzop said reassuringly. Kaya nodded and leaned into Yuzop. They watched the ocean together as the waves crashed against the ship. Together they wondered about where their adventures would take them next. Alvida had been watching the crew for a while now. Smiling to herself, she realized that she had gotten quite attached to the crew. However, she was going to have to find a way to convince Luffy to let her stay on the ship if she wanted to do that. But how was she going to do that? But just being nice work. Maybe she should talk to Luffy again and ask him to let her stay. And this was assuming she even wanted to stay. After all, she had only ever sailed under her flag. Maybe it would be for the best if she split ways. He was currently sitting alone on the figurehead. But it seemed like she wasn't going to be going anywhere soon, so she let it rest for now. Hopefully, she wouldn't be told to get off the ship before she had made up her mind. Later that day, Nami and Zoro got a hold of Luffy. "Luffy, I think it's time we talk about." "Well, what's going on?" Nami said to Luffy. All right," Luffy said as he hopped off the figurehead. "Let's talk below deck," Zoro said, and they went down into the ship where they entered the cargo hold. "So Luffy, you know Robin, right?" Nami asked Luffy. "Yep, she's going to be our next Nakama," Luffy responded. "You and Robin were pretty much best friends now that I think about it." Nami nodded at this. She didn't really know much about the woman right now, but she had no reason to doubt Luffy. She wondered what kind of person Nico Robin was. "So, do you think you'll be telling the rest of the crew about your past?" Zoro asked. "I want to, but I'm not really sure the best way to go about doing it. Especially with Kaya and Najiko, they never came with us the first time around. Alvida never traveled with us either. I didn't even know her before. And would I tell Vivi? We travel with her for a while, but she goes back to her country after a while." Luffy had been thinking about that for a while now. "Well, maybe you can ease them into it. We can be there to help you explain to the rest if you want. I think that the crew deserves to know. It involves all of us, and I don't feel too well about lying to everyone. Vivi might not need to know though, since she isn't a crew member though." Nami said. "I'm not sure if I would tell Alvida or Robin yet either. They don't really know us that well, whereas the rest of them have been traveling long enough to know us well enough," Zoro said, thinking about the crew. Nami, nodding at this, replied maybe it would be best to say nothing for now. After all, it is a pretty heavy subject, and really we've only been sailing together for a few weeks now. The trio agreed to this plan. None of the three liked withholding the truth from their nakama, but at the time it seemed like the best course of action. High up in the sky, the Straw Hats were being followed. The Unluckies were currently watching the Straw Hats from afar. Their boss, Mr. Zero, had ordered them to find and follow the Straw Hats as well as potentially miss all Sunday. He wasn't a trusting man, and when one of his agents did something unexpected, it was the Unlucky's job to figure out what was going on. Right now, they were watching Miss All Sunday enjoying a drink on the Straw Hat ship as she laughed with its captain. The two couldn't speak, but the look they shared said enough between the two of them. The boss wasn't going to be pleased when he found this out. They turned from the ship as they headed in a new direction. They had a report to fill out. Luffy remembered an item that he had stolen from Smoker. Taking it from the men's cabin, he approached Yuzop with the Seastone jet. Yuzop looked at the weapon curiously. "What's that for, Luffy?" "It's a special kind of weapon that can affect devil fruit users. I was wondering if you could use it to make some kind of weapon that could be useful for you," Luffy said as he handed over the weapon to Yuzop. Yuzop took it out of Luffy's hands and began to examine it. Most of the weapon seemed ordinary, but the tip seemed to be made from some kind of stone. "Luffy, do you know how it works? How does it affect devil fruit users?" "Here, I'll show you. Just make sure you have a good grip on it," Luffy said as he reached out and grabbed hold of the Seastone tip. Instantly, Luffy felt its effect as he dropped to his knees as his strength was being sapped from him. "Luffy," Nami shouted in concern as she witnessed her captain collapse. She rushed over to him to see what had happened as most of the crew looked on in concern. Luffy let go of the weapon and began to stand again. I'm fine, Nami. I was just demonstrating how sea prison stone affected devil fruit users. Yuzop looked at the tip again in surprise. So you're saying that it takes away your energy? Or is there something else? Luffy began to explain. Basically, sea prism stone is my weakness to the sea in solid form. It takes away my devil fruit powers and saps my strength as long as I am in contact with it. Normally my powers prevent me from taking an injury from things like bullets or blade. But if I were in contact with this when it happened, it would hurt me just like it would any of you. Yuzop whistled in surprise. That seemed like a very dangerous weapon indeed. His captain was by far the strongest person he had ever seen, but here in his hands was Luffy's greatest weakness. If it's just in the tip, then there should be enough here for one pellet. But I don't think much more than that, Yuzop said. That's fine, Yuzop. Even if it is only one, you never know when that could come in handy. And in the future, if we come across any more of the stuff, you can make more then, Luffy said. Nami was glad that Luffy had been alright, but such a weapon made her uneasy. She didn't like the idea of weapons being out there that could do such harm to Luffy and every other devil fruit user on the crew like her sister. Kaya looked at the weapon and got an idea. At this point, she hadn't had any indication of what her devil fruit power could be, if any. Kaya tentatively poked the end of the weapon and instantaneously felt the effect. Withdrawing her hand as fast as she could, she felt strength return to her. So it seems you definitely ate a devil fruit then, even if we don't know what it is yet, Luffy said, looking at Kaya. I suppose we will just have to wait and see what it does then, Luffy said, smiling at her. Kaya smiled back as she thought about just what her power might be. The next day the Straw Hats found themselves getting closer to the island of Little Garden. Nami was watching the log pose, and sure enough, it pointed directly to the next island. Luffy was getting excited. This time he'd be seeing Braggy and Dory fight again, which he was looking forward to. Our second island on the Grand Line, Kaya said to Yuzop. Yeah, I wonder what we'll see with this one, Yuzop replied. You know, this next island has a bit of a reputation, you know. Robin began. Nami, curious, asked. What are you talking about? Well, this next place is called Little Garden. It seems to be a very dangerous island. No one who has ever gone there has ever gone on to the next island. Whatever lurks on that island is very dangerous indeed, Robin said, smiling. Luffy laughed. Sounds like fun. The rest of the crew looked at the excited Luffy. That's not how you should be acting, was a common thought between them. Why did you have to destroy the eternal log pose? Nami lamented. We could have avoided all of this and gotten right to Alabasta. Because where's the fun in that? Luffy said while laughing. Zoro looked to Robin. Anything else you know about the island or just its reputation? No, just its reputation, Robin said, looking at the island. Whatever danger lurked there would have to deal with them. Looking at her newest captain, she smirked. Let's see if he lives up to his bounty. Then they began sailing down one of the rivers of the island. As they cruised down, they noticed roars and giant thunderous booms that were assumed to be from beasts. Soon they could see a dinosaur head poking from out of the treetops as it munched on some leaves. Wow, are those dinosaurs? Kaya asked in amazement. This must be a prehistoric island. Because of the chaotic nature of the Grand Line, some islands are like this, stuck in time seemingly, Vivi said, explaining. Luffy suddenly had an idea. Sanji, bake me a lunchbox, he yelled as he headed below deck. He headed towards where they kept their booze and found one of the barrels. It didn't seem tampered with, but you could never be too sure. Picking it up, he shook it up to see if it exploded. What are you doing? Nami, witnessing him shaking their liquor, wondered what he was doing. Oh well, last time someone booby-trapped it, so it exploded when someone drank it, Luffy said. But nothing happened, so I think it's safe. Luffy laughed. Wait, you thought it was a bomb? So your first idea is to shake it to see if it explodes? In our ship, Nami shouted at Luffy. Luffy looked at the barrel in realization, and then after a moment began to laugh again. Good point, Nami. Good thing it wasn't a bomb then. Nami let out a sigh of exasperation. Sometimes her captain could act like a total moron, and other times he seemed wise beyond his years. Laughing to herself, she supposed he was likely the wisest moron she ever knew. But that's what made him so likable, she thought. Luffy set the barrel down and looked to Nami. Want to go on an adventure? On an island full of dinosaurs? No thanks, I'll stay on the ship, Nami said. Okay, if you're sure, Luffy said as he ran back on deck. Sanji was currently on deck with a few lunch boxes for the crew. Who wants to see the island with me? Luffy asked, looking to the crew. Vivi was the first one to respond. I'll come with you. I want to clear my head a little, and that sounds like fun, Vivi answered. I'll go with you as well, Captain, Robin answered as well. We might as well restock on some food here since there seem to be large animals for meat, Sanji said. I'll go out and hunt something for us to eat. Tosu-ch. Like you'd be able to bring anything and worth eating, Zoro said to the cook. Shitty swordsman. Like you could hunt anything as big as me, Sanji replied. Whoever brings back the most meat will be the winner, Zoro said back. Fine then, Sanji answered. The two then headed off into the jungle, going separate ways. Alvida spoke up and said, I'll go with you as well if you don't mind, Luffy. Luffy nodded at this, and then without any other crew speaking up to go along as well, the four headed out with their lunches into the jungle. Karu followed after Vivi as well. This left Nijiko, Nami, Kaya, and Yuzop on the ship. After some time passed, the four began to hear heavy footsteps. Looking around, the four were worried. They realized the strongest of their crew were currently exploring the island while they watched the ship. What's that noise? Kaya asked, looking to Yuzop. I am sure it's nothing. Maybe an earthquake. Yuzop lied. Soon, however, they could see the trees being parted by a massive beast. And finally, it revealed itself, toppling the gigantic tree in its way with a brush of its hand. Do you have any rum? The giant asked the pirates. On another part of the island, Luffy, Robin, Alvida, and Vivi were currently exploring. So, are there other islands like this on the Grand Line? Alvida asked. Robin answered with, there are a large variety of islands on the Grand Line. Some can be like this, others can be islands where they are always winter, and some are desert islands like the princess here. Alvida nodded. It seemed like the Grand Line was indeed a chaotic place. Up above they could see the giant dinosaur they saw from the ship. It was leaning down with its long neck, and it scooped up some leaves in its maw. It began to chew when suddenly its eyes went wide as if it was surprised by something. Suddenly a flash was seen as blood spurted from its neck as the head was severed from its body. Then a booming laugh was heard. That will make for a good lunch. A voice called out. What is that? Vivi asked, surprised. That sounds like a giant, Robin said simply. I wonder why it's called Little Garden if it's inhabited by giants. She wondered aloud. Hey giant, Luffy called out. The giant could be seen looking around for the source of the noise. Finally, he noticed the small band of pirates and said, so it seems like we have some visitors on the island. Nami, Yuzop, Kaya, and Nijiko were currently enjoying a meal with Braggy, who had invited them to his camp. They had given him some of their meat, and the giant was now drinking his fill while the Straw Hats ate. So, what brings you to this island? The giant asked. We're on our way to Alabasta. This is one of the islands on the route there, Nami told the giant. Well, you're going to be waiting a while for that. It takes 1 full year for the log post to set on this island. Braggy responded. What? Nami shouted. A full year? We can't stay here that long. Well, if you can find one among the dead here, you might find one that has set by now. It's been a while since anyone new has come to the island, Braggy said, pointing out a pile of bones. They died on this island before their log pose could set. Most humans don't last very long on a dangerous island like this. Yuzop slowly walked over to the pile. He looked over to the girls, who gave him words of encouragement from afar. You can do it, Yuzop, Kaya shouted at him. Yeah, don't think about how it's a pile of dead bodies, Nijiko said. Thanks, Yuzop muttered under his breath as he looked down on the pile. Sure enough, they were human bones. He began to shift around in the bones until he found what he was looking for. Picking up a bony wrist, he slid the log pose off its arm. He headed back to Nami and dropped the device in her hand. Nami stuck out her tongue in disgust. Couldn't you have at least washed it? Yuzop yelled back. Just be glad you didn't have to take it from a dead guy. Nami looked at the new log pose, and sure enough, it seemed to be pointing towards the next island. She pocketed the device and looked at the one on her wrist. That one was still spinning slowly, unaccustomed to the newest island's magnetic field. Ah, so there was one, Braggy responded. I'm glad one made it for you guys. Most humans end up crushed or eaten on this island, so it's good you found an unbroken one. It was then that the volcanoes in the middle of the island began to erupt. Braggy looked towards the volcano and stood up. Well, it's time, he said as he picked up his weapon and left the camp. As he left, he said over his shoulder, sorry, I have to head out for a bit. Where do you think he's going? Kaya asked. Who knows? Yuzop responded as they watched the giant walk away. On the opposite side of the island, the other 4 Straw Hats were talking with Dory. What are you doing on this island? Do you live here? Vivi asked the giant. No, I come from the island of Elbaf, Dory responded. The reason I'm here is that I'm fighting a duel. Although I don't really remember the reason why, to be honest. Wait, how long have you been here? Alvida asked. I think it's been, well, maybe around 100 years since I came to this island, Dory said, scratching his beard. You've been here 100 years? Vivi asked in surprise. Why? Well, because of the duel, remember. It's gone on 100 years now, but I can feel I'll be winning soon, Dory said, laughing. Mr. Giant, if you don't remember why you're fighting, why do you continue to do so? Robin asked. Well, because those are the rules of my village. If 2 giants get into an argument, they duel until our god declares one the winner, Dory said, grinning. Suddenly, the eruption of the central volcano began. Dory stood up and looked towards the mountain. That's the signal for our duel. Not sure when, but it just became a habit, I suppose, to duel every time that volcano erupted, Dory said, drawing his sword. Robin frowned at that. You fight to the death daily, and you don't even remember the reason. Seems foolish. Dory laughed, looking at the small woman. It wasn't every day a human had the stones to call a giant foolish. Maybe, but our pride says we must. Dory could see Braggy heading towards his side of the mountain with his axe raised. It was time. The two giants clashed in the center of the island, sending tremors that were felt by the pirates on both sides of the island. Yuzop was in awe watching the two brave warriors face each other down. The strength he was seeing was immense. They're real warriors of the sea, Yuzop said under his breath. Eventually, after trading blows with each other, they resorted to using their shields to bash each other in the face, knocking them to the ground. After laying on the ground for a short while, both began to laugh. Dory, I have some guests today that brought alcohol, Braggy shouted to Dory. Dory laughed. Well, give me some. Been so long since I've had any alcohol. The two giants slowly got to their feet. Give me a minute, Dory, and I'll get your booze. Braggy began walking towards his camp, stretching his sore muscles after their fight. Dory waited patiently as he rubbed some of his aching joints. This fight had been just as hard as their other fights, and it had ended the same way as their other ones as well. Soon he saw Braggy heading his way with a massive smile on his face and 3 casks of liquor between his fingers. Dory grinned when he saw them. Here, Dory, enjoy, Braggy said as he tossed the alcohol to his friend. Thank you, Braggy. See you at the next fight, Dory replied as he turned and headed back to his camp. Laughing, Dory headed back to his own to get back to his guests. Back at Dory's camp, the 4 were waiting for their host's arrival. What's the plan, Captain? Robin asked Luffy. Well, we need to figure out how long the log pose takes to set on this island. When it's ready, I guess we are good to go to the next island, Luffy said, thinking about it. They would have to get another log pose considering it took a year for it to set on this island. However, Baroque Works should be attacking soon. Hopefully, they could still grab one from Mr. 3. Then Dory came lumbering back into the camp and sat down in front of the straw hats. Popping the lid to one of the casks with his thumb, he drained the whole thing like it was only a thimble. Dory, how long does the log pose take to set on this island? Vivi asked. Dory thought about it while he popped another cask open. Well, I believe it takes about a year for it to set here. At this, Dory began to laugh as he consumed the next cask. Wiping his mouth off, he said most humans don't last all that long, to be honest. This island kills them before their log pose sets, although there was one that left before and just sailed in a random direction. Dory thought aloud. Really, how did that go for him? Alvida asked Dory. The giant stroked his beard as he popped open the last cask. I think something ate him before he could get too far now that I think about it. Vivi looked worried at this. So even if we make it the full year, it's likely we'll just be eaten before we can leave, she shouted. Dory laughed again. Like I said, humans don't last long here. You're too fragile for an island like this. Vivi and Alvida grew depressed to hear this while Luffy just laughed and Robin smiled. Alvida, looking to Luffy, said, I don't think this is the best time to laugh. We'll be fine. I'm too strong for this island to kill and I'll protect you guys. He laughed, looking back to Alvida. Alvida just shook her head at that. But Luffy, there is no way we can spend an entire year here. What about my people? Vivi said to Luffy. Well, you could always try your luck and see if you can get to the next island without a log pose, Dory said as he finished the last of the alcohol. Luffy laughed again. Well, I am quite lucky. We'd make it to the next island for sure, Luffy said confidently. Robin laughed at that as well, and Dory broke out into a massive fit of laughter. I like you, human. You remind me of myself. Only puny, Dory said, laughing. Luffy laughed as well at this, and the other 3 merely watched on in amusement as the two laughed together. They were interrupted, however, as the central volcano began to erupt again. Dory stopped laughing and stood up, drawing his sword. Already, surely you guys wait for your wounds to heal, Vivi asked the giant. Dory laughed at that. Why? Braggy is just as injured as I, so it gives no one the advantage. He left the Straw Hats as he headed towards his latest duel. Luffy was a little concerned. No moves had been made by the members of Baroque Works. What was their plan? He wondered. He would have to wait and see. The giant's fight had ended just like all the other ones. There had been no interference from Baroque Works, and Luffy began to wonder what was going on. Were they waiting to attack this time around? After their latest fight, the giants had led both groups of pirates back together. You found a log pose then, Nami? Vivi asked. Yup, it was super gross, but I managed to get one. Found it off a dead pirate, Nami explained. Wait, I did that? Yuzop yelled angrily. Yeah, but I had to make you do it, which was just as difficult in my opinion, Nami said flippantly. Luffy just laughed. Well, cool. Then we can head to the next island. Yeah, this one's set so we can leave whenever we find Zoro and Sanji, Nami said. Maybe they made it back to the ship, Alvida suggested. Yes, Sanji might have made it back, but I doubt Zoro would have, Yuzop said, thinking. Likely Zoro was lost in the middle of the jungle somewhere. Yeah, how about some of us split up? Some of us should go back to the ship to get it ready, but the rest can look for Zoro and Sanji if he's still out there, Nami said. All right, Luffy said, attempting to take off into the jungle but found a firm grip locked on his collar. Not so fast. If we let you go looking for them, we'll just have to send a search party to find you as well. You're coming with me, Nami said, holding her captain in place. Luffy deflated. All right, Nami, and allowed himself to be dragged off by Nami. I think I'll go back to the ship as well if you don't mind, Robin said, walking after the two. This left the rest of the Straw Hats to split into pairs. Vivi and Karu left on their own. With Karu's speed, it wouldn't take them too long to cover a lot of ground. Yuzop and Kaya, of course, went together in a different direction. This left Alvida and Nijiko to form the last group as they went on their way to find the missing Straw Hats. Eventually, the two hunters were found, each dragging their trophies for measurement against their opponent. Unfortunately for the two, it was found that the two beasts were strikingly similar in size. Without any noticeable difference, the two argued over who should be the winner. Well, clearly mine has more meat on it, so I should be the winner, declared Zoro, pointing out how stocky his beast was. Barely any of it is usable. Look at all the bones yours has, Sanji yelled, pointing to the frilled crest of Zoro's trophy. Mine has more edible meat, so I should be the winner. Enough, Nami yelled. Why can't we just call it a tie and move on? There is no tie in a competition, Zoro scoffed, overlooking the bickering. Luffy was currently sitting on his post on Going Merry. He was deep in thought about the events that should have taken place here. No one had attacked them this time around. They'd parted from the giants who had wished them good luck on their journey. Without any incident, it looked like the Straw Hats would continue on their journey without being attacked by Baroque works. Luffy looked towards their newest crew member. Nico Robin was the only one who could have affected this change, he was sure of it. Looking towards the sea again, he contemplated what this could mean for their journey. Luffy was sure Crocodile was likely taking some steps to watch his progress. He would have to ask Robin what she had told Crocodile. He was interrupted from his thoughts by a feminine voice giving a pained "oh" and a loud slap. Turning, he saw Robin rubbing her arm as she crushed something underfoot. Robin rubbed her arm, trying to get rid of the stinging sensation on her arm. Luffy could only stare in open-mouthed shock. How could he forget? The whole reason his journey from this island to Alabasta had gotten sidetracked. That fever that had nearly taken his navigator the last time around had struck again. Only this time it had caught Robin instead. It didn't matter now that events on this island had changed. They needed to get a doctor and fast. Everyone get on board. We're taking off, Luffy shouted to his crew. Boy, Captain, what's the rush? Zoro asked. I was just about to show this shitty cook his place. No time. Let's get moving, Luffy ordered. Sanji and Zoro gave one last glare towards each other but listened to their captain. It wasn't usual for their captain to give orders, but figured he had his reasons. Luffy could only hope that the log pose they had found was currently pointing towards Drum Island and not somewhere else. With the usable meat from their catches aboard, Zoro raised the anchor as the rest of the crew prepared to set sail. The sails catching the wind began to push the ship forward and down the river. Soon the pirates found themselves pushing out to sea, the vast ocean spreading out before them. Then a giant mass arose from the ocean, causing the waves to push the Going Merry back towards the island. Shouts of alarm came from the Straw Hats as they watched the behemoth goldfish bear down on them. It opened its giant mouth as it prepared to swallow them. Then a terrifying presence washed over the crew, and the giant fish froze as it began to tremble in place. The Straw Hats quickly realized where it was coming from as they saw their captain staring the giant fish down. Just what was Luffy doing to cause this amount of fear to come over everyone? Luffy was meeting the giant's gaze as finally the fish broke the stare down and began to swim away in fear. The crew could only watch in amazement as their captain had stared down a sea king and caused it to turn tail and run. Robin observed Luffy as his face returned to its usual smile. Whatever power he had just used lost its effects as he began smiling again. Just how powerful was this pirate if he could make a sea king cower before him? With their latest obstacle out of the way, the Straw Hats were free to move on to their next destination. However, far away, some enemies of the Straw Hats were plotting their downfall. On the winter island of Drum Kingdom. You are sure they are coming to this island? Wapol asked his new ally. Mr. 3 took a sip from his teacup before he answered, of course. Baroque Works has some of the most thorough intelligence gathering there is. They will be here any day now. That I can guarantee. All right, if you say so. Why do you want to kill them so badly anyway? Wapol asked. The man and his group had been handy in retaking his kingdom, but he still didn't trust them. There was something about Mr. 3 that made him uneasy. That is nothing I would worry about if I were you. The Straw Hats made themselves an enemy of our group, so they will have to be killed. It is as simple as that. Although the blue-haired girl with them must be captured alive, I cannot stress that enough, Mr. 3 said, looking at the recently reimposed king. Yeah, I get it. Well, I'm getting bored waiting for them, but if you insist they are coming, then I guess I'll believe it. In the meantime, though, let's have some entertainment. He stood up from his chair and shouted out to his men. Bring out the creature, Wapol yelled as his men gathered in the courtyard. At his call, a cage was brought from within the castle. His men set the cage down and stood guard next to it. This beast had put up a lot of fight when they had come to retake the castle, so they weren't going to take any chances now. All right, men, we are going to have some fun here. The man who kills this beast will become my new captain of the guard, Wapol yelled out to his soldiers. Most of his men looked wary at that. A lot of them had been injured while retaking the castle, so they knew just how tough this thing was. He laughed though as he noticed some of his men draw their weapons in anticipation as they eyed the creature. So it seemed there was some ambition among his underlings. "One of you," Wapol yelled to the men closest to the cage, "put a bullet in his leg. I don't want him escaping in case none of you are a match for him." The creature shied away from the cage walls as it looked wildly at the humans around it. One of the guards pointed his weapon at the prisoner and aimed at its leg. The blue-nosed creature's scream of pain was drowned out by the men shouting for blood. After a couple of days of sailing, the Straw Hats were growing worried about Robin's worsening condition. Robin was now confined to her bed fighting an intense fever. Luffy was currently watching over his sick Nakama, feeling guilty. The first time this had happened, there had been nothing he could do to prevent it, but this time it was his fault that Robin had gotten sick. The worst part was being that he had no way of knowing whether he was on the right track to Drum Kingdom or if he was just sailing farther and farther away from hell. There was a knock on the door as someone came in. Turning, Luffy saw Nami entering the cabin. "Luffy, I think you should come to see this," she said to him as she held the door for him. Luffy looked outside and could see snow. For the first time in days, he smiled. It wasn't long before the Straw Hats found themselves in front of the icy landscape of Drum Island. The Going Merry was soon pulled into an inlet on the large island. Dropping anchor, the Straw Hats began to prepare to disembark in search of a doctor. "Do you think there are any doctors here that could help Robin?" asked Yuzop. Nami gave a sidelong glance to Luffy, then responded hopefully, "There is, because right now this is our only option. Who knows how long it will take for the log pose to set." Luffy was staying unusually quiet. He had been studying the shore expecting the villagers to show, but so far nothing had happened. Maybe they just hadn't noticed their approach. He hoped that was true, but he couldn't help feeling like something was wrong. "Well, the closest town looked to be about an hour's hike west of here. We should figure out who's staying and who's going before Robin gets any sicker," Nami said, looking to the crew. It was decided that Sanji, Nichiko, and Nami would be the ones to stay behind and watch the ship while the rest of the crew went in search of help for Robin. The crew bundled up in snow gear to stand against the intense cold of the island. Luffy, however, chose to go without. "Luffy, you should really put on a coat," Kaya said. "We don't want you getting sick as well." Luffy smiled and responded, "This weather doesn't bother me. I guess because of my devil fruit, cold or hot weather doesn't bother me." With Robin strapped to Luffy's back, the crew began their journey to the island's closest town. Luffy could only hope that they could direct them to Dr. Kira. When the Straw Hats arrived at Big Horn, however, it became apparent something was severely wrong with this island. Half of the town had been razed to the ground. Some of it looked like it had been burned down, while other buildings had been smashed to pieces. The remaining houses seemed to be housing the majority of the town's population. Some served as makeshift medical centers, but the people had to make do with the little medical knowledge that they did have, able to wrap cuts and use splints for broken bones, but little else for anything more serious. Kaya, seeing the state of the townspeople, rushed to the first aid stand. She wasn't a proper doctor yet, but these people needed whatever help she could supply. The people were wary at first, but they didn't have the luxury of turning down help. The townspeople who were uninjured went to Kaya for instructions on how to help others. Under Kaya's care, the townspeople for the first time in a long time had a somewhat functional hospital. "You youngsters best be careful on this island. King Wapol isn't going to be happy when he hears strangers are offering medical aid." Turning to the voice, an old man was seen sitting on the porch of one of the demolished houses. His arm was currently in a crude splint with a piece of cloth holding his arm in place. "King Wapol?" Vivi asked. That name sounded familiar, but she wasn't sure why. "Yes, our recently returned king wasn't too happy with how his kingdom welcomed him back. He and his new allies wiped out what little resistance we had. It became clear, though, that we were no match for him, though. He imprisoned our leader and headed back to his castle up on the tallest drum." The old man said this while pointing to the tallest peak with his uninjured arm. "King Wapol is sure to return soon for his tribute. We thank you for your aid, but I'm sure no one would like to see you harmed for your kindness here," he said, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "When did Wapol return?" Luffy asked the old man gravely. Something terrible had happened to cause this change to Drum Island. "The day before last. That was when our patrols had seen a pirate ship heading towards the island. We knew right away, though, when we saw that flag, that Wapol had returned," he said, looking at the ground. "We tried to resist, of course. No one wanted Wapol's cruelty to continue. We were too weak, though, and his people defeated us easily." "How could a king do this to his own people?" Vivi shouted in horror. "To abuse your people like this, it stood against everything she believed in as a monarch." The old man chuckled sadly at that. "King Wapol never cared one lick about the people of this country. He only enjoyed the power of his position and the comforts they brought him." "Are there any doctors on this island still?" Luffy asked the old man. He had a feeling he wasn't going to like the answer, but Robin still needed help. "Besides the girl you brought?" the old man asked, confused. "The only other ones left would be up with the king in his castle. He executed and exiled the rest of them." There was one doctor though who helped people after King Wapol left. But who's to say what became of her with his return? She might be dead, or maybe she was just imprisoned. Despite the rumors, she was one of the best doctors this island ever had. Wapol only wanted the best 20 doctors, so maybe she is still alive. Luffy nodded at the old man's words and thought about what he needed to do next. Looking up towards the castle, he realized that there was really only one course of action at this point. Alright, I'm leaving for the castle, Luffy declared to his crew. You guys stay here and help protect the town. The others grew a little restless at this. Yuzop asked, are you sure, Luffy? Maybe someone should go with you. I'll be alright, Yuzop. Luffy looked back at him. This town needs our help, and I can manage those guys on my own. The crew took up positions around the city, helping where they could. They'd make sure to protect this town. Yuzop took up a post on top of one of the remaining buildings. If anyone came to attack this town, they would be ready. Luffy found Kaya and told her his plan. I need the rest of you to stay and help the town as I bring Robin up the mountain. If there is anyone here who can help her, they should be there. Do you need anyone to go with you, Luffy? It looks like a really long hike. Are you sure you should take her with you? Kaya asked, looking at the feverish woman. Unfortunately, I don't think we have another choice. I don't want the chance that someone could come through and harm any of you, and I can take care of myself and Robin. I'd rather know you guys are all here if someone does attack this town, Luffy said seriously. Kaya nodded at this and continued helping the people where she could. Watching as Luffy headed away, she hoped that he would be able to save Robin and these people. Luffy, with Robin on his back, was heading up towards the mountain. With his powers, he was able to heat his body to the point that Robin would keep warm even in the intense snowfall. Robin began to stir a little from her fever-induced sleep. Luffy, she said weakly, why are you doing all this for me? She knew if anyone else had found her in this position, they would have killed her long before now. Because Robin, you're my nakama now, whether you like it or not. I won't let my nakama die, Luffy said, but to himself, he thought, never again at least. Robin wanted to respond but found herself slipping back into her restless sleep. Before she did, however, she wondered to herself when was the last time anyone would have fought like this for her. Luffy was deep in thought as he hiked through the thick snow of Drum Island. Something was definitely wrong with the way things were going. The return of Wapol had been a surprise considering how early it had occurred. He hoped that Chopper and that crazy doctor woman were still up there and unharmed. If they weren't, well, he would figure it out from there should the worst happen. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.